Okay.
We are live streaming.
Very good. Welcome everyone to our council meeting of October the 12th. For those watching at home on our live stream, welcome as well. As I call the meeting to order, we just want to acknowledge as we're gathered here and a few of our councillors are at home that we're all sitting and gathering in the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And I'm keeping an eye on the screens here as best I can to see if there's any hands going up. I don't see. Councillor Zelka, is that your hand up?
Yes, I do. I apologize. I'm going to vote against, and the reason, if you'd like to know why, is because it doesn't include specifically public participation. So I'm going to vote against the agenda for today. Thank you.
Okay. Normally, procedurally, that's you can always vote against anything you wish. There's the agenda is laid out in accordance with the procedures bylaw and our best practices for land use applications. So is there?
But I'm unhappy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. So we have one vote in opposition. That carries. We have adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of September 27th. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussions, questions, or changes? I am not seeing any, so all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to Mayor's remarks. I don't have many, but I have, this is our first gathering since the September 30th National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And I just want to say thank you to all the councillors who attended the community reconciliation events and took on personal learnings for those for that day in reflection. I just want to specifically thank Councillor Appleton, who stood in as acting mayor at the community event held here in Oak Bay. His attendance allowed me to represent Oak Bay at the regional reconciliation event hosted by the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. I'd also just like to express my appreciation to the City of Colwood for hosting at Royal Bay and Chief Rob Thomas of the Esquimalt Nation and the many elders and dignitaries who gathered there as a regional united voice in support of reconciliation goals and healing, and to bear witness to the stories of the First Nations elders. So Haishka to all who attended and to all of my fellow councillors who have also taken on that role of reconciliation and reflection. Also just want to note people that people watching at home that the budget survey is closing on October 24th. So if you haven't yet taken the budget survey, please do so. This year we have asset management on that, very specifically asking for some information, but also all of the other many services that we endeavor to provide here in the municipality. And also want to remind members of council and the public, we're going to be undertaking our 2022 strategic planning process in November, so just in a few weeks' time. That's quite different than previous years where we've attached it to the budget process typically in February or even March. This is an effort through better financial planning to move all of our budget and strategic planning a bit earlier, so it's a bit more strategic. And so just want to let everybody know and remind council of that fact as well. With that, we're ready to move on to the rest of the agenda, so thank you. Up first, we have item number 5.1. I'm happy to welcome Michael Barnes and Kevin Lorette from the Capital Regional Hospital District, who are here to present an overview of the public consultation of Oak Bay Lodge. Normally we have staff introduce, but this is a fairly arm's length process underway, so if it's all right, I'll just introduce. Kevin Lorette is the General Manager of Planning and Protective Services. Michael Barnes is the Senior Manager of Health and Capital Planning Strategies. I want to just thank you, Mr. Barnes and Mr. Lorette, for coming here tonight. It's a real courtesy allowing us to have see these high-level results and provide comment to the CRHD board if we see fit, so that when they get this report and other information, they have that as well. I just want to make sure all of those watching understand that the consultation to date has been early and necessarily a little vague, as we don't yet know the services that are going to be going onto the site from Island Health. I also want to make sure it's clear that this is a land use application, and so council is bound by many restrictions. Two things just to remember. Council is going to be considering whatever application comes before us in the future, so we have to maintain an open mind, and so we won't be dictating or naming specifics that we need to have in the application at this meeting. In this case, the CRHD or Cap Regional Hospital District is the applicant, and we can provide advice on process, the consultation process, and the final application are obviously up to the CRHD because we have that role. And when it comes to us of actually reviewing the application to see whether it meets the community's needs. So I guess our hope here, and I'll leave it with this. Yes?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, I can't seem to find my, Tara here?
Yes, Councillor Ney?
Sorry, I couldn't, there we go.
Oh,
Sorry,
there's a hand.
I couldn't find my raised hand. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself from this agenda item because there's a potential conflict of interest based on where I own a property. So
Okay.
I will click out here.
Okay, so can we arrange to text Councillor Ney as soon as this section is done? You can just, thank you, Councillor Ney. And we'll text you when this session is over with. So thank you for that. Yeah, so obviously, thank you for being here. The consultation process ultimately should help craft an application that aligns with the community needs, which is the point of these consultation processes. And because if this is done well, if we can hear these concerns and ideas, then it has a much better chance of success when it comes back to this table. So with that, that's a little bit of background. Welcome, Mr. Barnes and Mr. Lorette. I'm not sure who is speaking. Looks like Mr. Lorette is up first on this presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is a real pleasure to be here tonight in person to provide an opportunity to present the work that we're going to be that we have undertaken to date and we have going forward on the Oak Bay Lodge property. In terms of the format for tonight, I'm just going to provide a high-level overview, introduction to the hospital district. I'll pass it over to Mr. Barnes, who's going to go through the results of the public consultation to date. And then I'll end up with the next steps that we'll be undertaking in the project, and then we'll be available for any questions that the council has following that. So next slide, please, if you can advance it. The Capital Regional Hospital District's mandate is to provide the local share of health infrastructure funding. The Oak Bay Lodge site is an exciting opportunity to provide much needed health services to Oak Bay and the region. And the CRHD, Capital Regional Hospital District, took ownership of the Oak Bay Lodge property in August of last year, and that was following the residents that transitioned into the Summit Residential Care Facility that we completed on Hillside Avenue. Once they transitioned out, we took ownership from Island Health in August. The CRHD launched a comprehensive community consultation process back in January of this year, and then we've recently concluded a second round of engagement in August. Next slide, please. So the redevelopment is a collaborative effort with the hospital district as the developer and landowner, working in partnership with Island Health, who's responsible for the health care service delivery, and as well as you've indicated, Your Worship, Oak Bay Municipality as the regulatory body with authority on zoning and land use approvals. The local community is also an important component in this process, and at this time I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Barnes to provide you an update on the community consultation process. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mr. Lorette. It's a pleasure to be here today and have an opportunity to update you on what I consider to be a really exciting project and an exciting opportunity for the Capital Region and for Oak Bay residents. As Mr. Lorette indicated, we have undertaken an 8-month process that began back in January of this year to gather the input from the local community. We have spoken to surrounding neighbors, community associations, service clubs, schools, businesses, and local police, just to give you some examples. Next slide, please. The community was notified through a variety of mechanisms. There was media releases, signage on the property, as well as social media campaigns that included Twitter and Facebook, as well as traditional print media and through the World Wide Web. Next slide, please. The community engagement was conducted online due to COVID restrictions for the most part, but we were very pleased with the travel, with the level of engagement and participation from the community. To date, we received 173 people who attended the 4 open houses electronically. 14 people also attended small group meetings where possible. Those were done either electronically or in person as the COVID restrictions loosened. We've also received around 850 completed surveys. So we've been really pleased with the uptake to date. Next slide, please. The first round of community engagement really focused on introducing the project to the community and gathering their high-level ideas around healthcare priorities, as well as visioning for the future. The community indicated support for a few key areas. As you can see in the slide, there was primary care, seniors health services, addictions and mental health, and a public health unit were the ones that had the most support. Next slide, please. Second round of engagement focused on reporting back to the community on what was heard in the first phase and presenting some possible building and service options. Participants were given the opportunity to identify what health services they thought were most important, which you can see on the slide above. Again, there were things like seniors housing and sports, primary and community care, and public health. They were also asked to select from 3 main development options. Next slide, please. Option 1 was to maximize health service options on the site with a site coverage of 50 to 60% and up to 6 stories. Some of those health service options could include services such as general practitioner offices, community health worker space, public health, rehab services, and brain injury services. Option 2 is to maximize site use with health services and non-healthcare services with a 55 to 70% site coverage and a 3 to 5 story building. Some examples of non-health care services could include affordable housing and independent seniors care. So that would be more along the lines of a private senior center. Option 3 is a seniors focused facility with a few supportive health services. It would be a 40 to 50% site coverage model and 3 to 5 stories. An example of a supportive health service would be an adult daycare program or other ancillary services that would essentially be in alignment with a long-term care or a seniors hub. Now that the second round of engagement is complete, we thought it was timely to provide an update to this council and talk about next steps. I'll pass it on to Mr. Lorette to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So as you can see on the timeline slide, the next steps include working with Island Health to secure funding and approvals. Island Health is awaiting direction from the Ministry of Health and the Treasury Board on the available of capital funding for the project. And so we'll be arranging a meeting with Island Health to discuss this in the coming weeks. We'll also be reporting back to our Hospitals and Housing Committee and our Capital Regional Hospital District Board on the outcome of the public engagement to date. I can share with you that Island Health has identified a seniors hub with other primary care and community health services as the priority for this site. In the event the Ministry of Health does not provide capital funding, we'll be exploring alternative funding models with Island Health, such as a long-term operating agreement. That's a mechanism and an arrangement that we did on the Summit Healthcare, where Island Health did not have access to capital, so the CRHD was the landowner developer, and then we entered into a long-term operating lease with Island Health as the service provider. So those other types of alternative funding arrangements exist, but we are looking at pursuing the first option, which is Island Health putting capital into the project. In the event the Ministry of Health, once a decision has been made on the funding, the hospital district will begin project feasibility and schematic design, including the geotech and architectural work. And upon completion of a design, a development permit, a rezoning application will be submitted through Oak Bay. And there will be further opportunity through the process for the community to provide input into the design as it begins to take shape. We hope to have a development application ready in 2022. However, the exact timing will depend on the nature of the funding and the partner approval process, and so we can't really speak to that exactly at this point, as a lot of it hinges on Island Health getting their approval on the funding, and if not, exploring other funding options. Next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation. We're happy to take any questions that the council has.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Just for clarification here, we've had a lot of correspondence on providing feedback and so forth, and this is really a CRHD process. So is that feedback really appropriate to go to the CRHD board? And it's probably the first key question I think we have here.
Yeah, thank you. I think really the process is for it to come directly through to staff, and then we're able to collate and aggregate the data in a way that we can present it to our board. So there was some timelines associated with the first and second round of the public engagement processes, just so that we could sort of have a final date, so the community knew that when to have their input submitted by. And we will be bringing a summary report back to the Capital Regional Hospital District Board in the next month or so, and we'll include any feedback we receive through this presentation as well.
Okay, thank you. And I would suggest probably process-wise, because what I'll do is I'll make notes of comments and thoughts here, and we'll just probably have a general motion to write a letter to the CRHD board to reflect what was spoken here, and then that can be wordsmithed offline without having to do it inside the meeting. So that's probably my suggested process to do that. But I'll take questions from around the table. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, and then Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for the report. A couple of questions about it. I've read all the material. I did actually participate also in the public engagement workshops that were held online. And so a couple of questions about that. The timing of the second engagement meeting being in the summer when it had just been, the province had just reopened somewhat, loosened the tethers and let people head off around the province, didn't seem like the most opportune time, and the attendance certainly seemed down. But I'm just wondering if there's any comments on the response at the first session and then the second session, and whether that the response actually met the expectations of what the CRHD had anticipated for participation on the public engagement?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Yeah, the timing was a little bit unfortunate, as you indicated, in that the things were opening up. So I think people were getting busy with other things. But part of the rationale for why we held the second round at that time is that we'd made a commitment in the first round to the community to report back in the spring to summer, and so we wanted to make sure that we were holding true to what we'd promised the community to do. And also the second round isn't going to be the final opportunity for community to provide feedback, so we did have some internal discussions about that, but we felt that it was important that we followed the process that we had communicated out to the community, so we went ahead with the second round of engagement. In terms of numbers, of the 850 total, I think roughly 300 of it was from the second round, and so certainly the numbers were down a little bit relative to the first round of engagement, but we were still really pleased with the uptake, and just for information's sake, there was about 63% of respondents were from Oak Bay specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that information. You spoke in the presentation of the small focus groups that were also invited to participate. Did those small focus groups, did they participate both in round 1 and round 2 discussions?
Yes, that's correct, in the first round and the second round.
one question I have, it was somewhat confusing to me. The summary report out of the first round of meetings, there was a disclaimer on page 2, basically, that said that the report would not necessarily represent public and stakeholders because participants would select to self-engage, and so therefore the information that was received might not represent public and stakeholders. So I'm just curious as to, for Oak Bay Council members, if the information that was reported on that first summary may not in fact represent the public opinion, how we are to interpret that. It seemed a confusing disclaimer to me because it would seem to infer that there should have been perhaps a more refined process to ensure that the information that was going to be coming forward in the reports accurately reflected both regional and local opinion, and so that isn't how I read that report.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Maybe you can just explain that disclaimer.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think the intent of the disclaimer was at the time that we entered into the engagement process, there wasn't any way for us to determine to what extent we were going to get regional uptake and input versus specific local municipal input. But now, having seen the variation of input that we did receive, I am quite confident that we have a good cross-section, both from within Oak Bay and more broadly throughout the region, as we asked people to identify where they were from. So that was sort of the intent of the disclaimer from the outset, just simply because we weren't able to predict who was likely to provide their input or not provide their input.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Another question that I do have as a participant in the second round was the discussion paper that was put forward for the second round of discussion did in fact say that Island Health had completed their needs assessment to understand what services were most appropriate, but there wasn't really a prioritization of what those were, and that the selection was made of what was most appropriate for this catchment area, but again, without specifics of what the services were that were appropriate. So that was, I found a little confusing. Alignment with Island Health strategic direction and the examination of the current capacity. So there was a lot of information that would indicate that Island Health actually, they have done a lot of their feasibility of services to be offered, but the information wasn't really available in a format that participants would then would really allow them to have a feel for where were the priorities. And so I think in seeing the selection of options, as is not unusual, there's a focus on, you tend to look for things that might be of concern to you rather than the other focus. And so is there a way that we can have a better understanding of how Island Health is prioritizing what they consider to be the most important services that might be offered and are most compatible with this site?
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. That's great feedback. What I can say is that of the array of health services that were included in the discussion guide for the second round, those were the health services that Island Health identified as both appropriate and a priority for the region. In terms of their prioritization process, that was entirely from a program perspective, and so they hadn't gone to the next level where they were examining feasibility, scope, cost, those other components. But from a prioritization and program perspective, the health services that were presented in the discussion guide were the ones that Island Health identified coming out of their needs assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Patterson.
And one more question, then I'll turn it over to others. But we hear so much in the media since pandemic about the pressure on health services, both in this province and throughout Canada, and so in considering what could be from a fairly significant health service here to a smaller facility, what knowledge do we have of the resources that are available through Island Health to, in fact, undertake a new facility in this region? I know, having to deal with Jubilee Hospital recently, and the wait times in emergency there of 6 to 9 hours, which somewhat illustrates the pressure that the health services system is under. Is there actually capacity within the health services to support a new health facility in this location, and how extensive are the services that could be provided? Where will the services come from?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. You touched on the capital availability, but this goes more to the operational cost supports.
Yeah, thank you. It's another great question. I won't speak on behalf of Island Health, but what I will say from the Capital Regional Hospital District's perspective is that there's an opportunity here for us to be creative. Certainly the hospital district's goal is to maximize the degree of health services, the community amenities that can be provided to the community on the site. And one way to do that is through capital resources provided by Island Health. As Mr. Lorette mentioned, there are other alternative options that we can pursue in the event that Island Health does not have capital dollars available. And in those instances, we look at other models where we would look at what operating resources are available that can be used to debt service long-term leases and so on. So we're not at a place yet where we've really made any decisions. We're just starting to have those discussions, and we're in a bit of a holding pattern where we're waiting for Island Health to let us know what their expectations are in terms of resources in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll maybe turn it over. I have probably a long list of questions, but I'll allow, certainly, I'll give up the floor now so that others can also ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. And Councillor Patterson actually asked a couple of my questions, but I wanted to go back to something that I think it was you, Mr. Lorette, said. And I think what I heard you say was that Island Health was leaning towards the seniors' housing and support for this property.
Mr. Burns, how much can you tell us where things are sort of?
Yeah, I think Mr. Lorette did indicate that Island Health has indicated that a seniors hub is I think their one of their top priorities, and that they view that as something that's probably feasible. To what degree that would include other health services, I think is still to be determined. But certainly long-term care is definitely a priority for them.
So, okay, thank you. I won't ask any more specific questions than that. I do have one other question. I noticed I think the mayor asked whether all of the correspondence that we'd received would be handed on to the CHRD, and the answer is yes, which is great, because we did get some really good, thoughtful correspondence in, which I think would be great for you guys to be able to read. One of the questions that did come out of that I saw was the question as to whether there'll be another CRHD-led consultation next year when the options are better known for what this site might hold.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Lorette.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. So that's the intent. Once we actually can do a schematic design and get some mock-ups of what this site is, our intention would be to get back out and get more public input into that, and that would really help shape our rezoning application.
And then I'll just ask one more question, if I might, and through you, Mayor. I think that I also read in some of the correspondence that there was a concern that some people may not have been aware of the second date. So if I'm not sure how you went about notifying. I know that postcards were dropped in some mailboxes, but there seem to have been a few people who live right in that area that perhaps were missed. And so I'm just wondering if you can clarify how you actually went about notifying the notification.
Sure. For both the first and second round, it was a variety of social media, postcards, print media, the website. There was also a mailing list from an email mailing list from the first round of engagements. We tried to hit all the different mediums so that we wouldn't miss anyone. That being said, as the other counselor pointed out, it was in the summer, so it could be that some people were away for 8 weeks when we started our process of sending out the information. So what I would say to those folks is that there still will be opportunity for them to have their feedback heard, both through CRHD and through Oak Bay as well.
Thank you. I think that's really important. So thank you very much for pointing that out, and I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Are there other questions from council? Go ahead, Councillor
Yes,
Appleton.
Mayor, it's Karine.
Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then I'll go to Councillor Appleton.
Are you taking just questions, or would you appreciate comments as well?
Well, I think both are appropriate. We're not in a sort of a motion situation here, so if you want to make comments or questions, they're both reasonably appropriate.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the representatives from the CRD for being here tonight. These are comments and questions that I have received from residents, and I prepared a submission in very large font tonight, given my challenge here with seeing. But I just wanted to provide a bit of a critique. I also participated in the online survey myself, and thank you very much. And thank you also for the comments, some of which have clarified, I think, some of the questions and issues that arose from residents. But I will tell you that my inbox was overwhelmed in the past week with concerns and questions. So the success or failure of any project, especially for communities, relies heavily on a timely and complete approach to consultation. With respect, it seems that the presentation that I read this week that is presented tonight, apart from the additional comments that I heard tonight, is scant on quantifiable data and thin on the ground related to community consultation. For example, consultation with the community in Oak Bay was conducted twice, once in the middle of a pandemic before BC announced a 4-stage reopening, and once in midsummer during peak holiday season, and I understand on the same date as a major public Oak Bay concert event. I also understand from residents that both sessions were not well advertised. Finally, this presentation does not appear to include data from the second consultation. Terminology used in the report is also confusing for residents, prompting the public to ask for clarity and detail on the use of terms such as intermediate short-term care, maximized health services, rehabilitation services, and short-term housing. Quote, local residents, unquote, are not identified as specifically living in Oak Bay. Data on demographics and Indigenous input seems to be missing, and spokespersons for the community bodies that are referenced are not identified. For example, the PAC, schools, 2 nonprofits, the Community Association of Oak Bay, and neighbors. School District 61 board representatives also appear to be missing from data sources. From the data presented in this survey result, how were you able to extrapolate enough accurate and adequate information from a small regional sample of just over 1,000 respondents? Notwithstanding your disclaimer in the summary report, page 2, industry standards for average survey responses rates is about 30%. If we apply this standard to Oak Bay's population of over 18,000, for example, then you would need to contact, survey, or consult with 5,400 residents to be truly confident about the results. As I mentioned, my inbox has been flooded with Oak Bay residents' messages expressing their concerns and posing important questions about this project. I appreciate the time they have taken to contact Council, and my comments and questions reflect what I have heard from them to date as follows. This is a large, dense residential area to the east and west of Bowker Avenue and to the north and south of Cadre Bay Road. Did your consultation include these adjacent neighborhoods and residents in these areas?
Thank you, Councillor.
And you don't have to answer these questions tonight. I'm happy to submit this to you for your reference. Question 2, can you please provide specifics on the number of people you contacted and the distance they live from the site?
So just,
Where and when
Councillor
did the
Green?
proposal originate? Sorry?
Sorry, Councillor, I'm just going to interrupt a little bit. Rather than, it may be helpful to ask these in some general terms, if that kind of information will be presented in the report to the series. It's not available tonight, obviously. So just curious in the terms of their standards approach to these kind of consultations. So I'm going to give the CRHD representatives a chance just to address some of your earlier questions, and I'll tackle these one by one if you don't mind. So go ahead, Mr. Barnes.
Sure, thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for the comment. So I guess what I would say first and foremost is that any and all feedback that you're receiving, we welcome. I would love to receive that feedback so that we can incorporate it. We did hire some consultants who are experts in community engagement, and certainly feel comfortable that their approach was done in an attempt to reach as many people across various different platforms and formats, as I indicated, through social media, print ads, etc. So certainly our intent through the first 2 rounds of engagement was to reach as many people as possible, and to have that input representative. Obviously, it's a small sample, but representative of the larger community. There is a summary report of the second round of engagement, which will be published once we've had an opportunity to present it to our board. And within that, I think you'll find some more information which will answer some of the issues and questions that you have raised. And certainly, as I said, there's still opportunity for further input to be included. One final comment that I would make is that there is a bit of a balancing act, just in terms of, from a privacy perspective, in terms of trying to present the information in a meaningful way, while also respecting the privacy of those that have submitted their input. What I can say, though, is all those groups that you did mention, I know that we've tried to incorporate or include them or invite them in our various processes so far. So certainly are aware of those groups and have made every effort to include their feedback thus far, and will continue to do so in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Do you want me to go on, Mayor?
Yeah, it sounds like you have a series of questions, so why don't we take them one at a time?
Okay, thank you. Third question, where and when did the proposal originate for Oak Bay Lodge to include transitional short-term housing provided to those with mental health and addictions challenges? Thank
you, Councillor Green. That was certainly a topic of much discussion on the last bunch of correspondence.
Yes, thank you. So it was identified through the first round of public engagement. It was something that some of the people that completed the surveys identified as an area that they thought would be a priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this one you may not be able to answer right now, but it was another question from the community. What other support services do you think will be required and provided on site to support this potentially at-risk population?
Thank you, Councillor Green. That might be a little early for that question, Mr. Burns.
Yeah, it is a difficult one for me to answer. What I can say, though, is that the type of mental health services that are being considered would be similar to what's at Glengarry. So I did bring a very quick blurb on that. So in that facility in particular, it helps people with mental health, physical health, and behavioral and substance use issues, and it's designed as transition for clients, and it's designed very short term to help move them through into other services. So, at a high level, that's the type of mental health services that were being considered.
Thank you. Just for my recollection, is Glengarry the one on Fairfield? Is that the?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. I will summarize quickly the other questions. I'm not sure, and I think you make a good point. It might be premature to be able to answer them at this point, but I just wanted the CRD representatives to understand what our residents are concerned about in the adjacent neighborhoods. This population, those with mental health and addictions issues, has complex and challenging needs requiring specialized supervision and intervention. What will be the impacts on capacity for Oak Bay's local police and first responder services that might be called upon to address challenges at this site and in nearby neighborhoods? So that was a question that I think many neighbors were expressing. They're also asking for, when the time comes, a clear risk management plan for the site to ensure public safety should these types of facilities be established at the site. And another question was, how would such services on the site interact with and relate to services currently provided at Erie Martin Pavilion and at Royal Jubilee Hospital through psychiatric emergency services offered by the Archie Courtnall Centre for Mental Health? What would the interaction be expected between elder care programs on the site, primary care health services, and what level of interaction would be expected between those programs and services and patients with mental health and addictions? And then what type of case management plan will be developed to address any impacts? And I realize that these are questions that are much more in-depth and will require time to sort out and would involve primarily Island Health at this point. I think that whatever health services and programs are provided on the site must be a good fit with the needs of our community and with the area in which the facility is located. But I can assure you that residents indicate that they are generally very supportive of elder care, primary health care, child care, or related services and programs that will not create a public safety challenge or risk to individuals and families living in the area or to the provision of existing core services provided by the municipality. And I appreciate the questions from my colleagues, particularly Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Patterson, related to the fact that you will be undertaking further consultation. That's my understanding tonight, and that you will be providing further details about the priorities that Island Health has identified for possible facilities at this site. And I agree with you, this is an exciting opportunity to do something very creative and meaningful for the community and for the region. And I hope that you will continue to engage Oak Bay residents in that exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. We've touched on this sort of next step of potential consultation. Could you just maybe flesh out for us? I understand this is not yet determined, but is the intention to sort of consolidate what services would make sense, and then do some massing estimates and things of that, and then go back out for to the public to sort of say, here's the range of services, and here's what the impact of adding those services onto the site would be? Or what sort of, has there been any thought in terms of what that format would look like? Because I think if I read through these many emails we've had, there's a lot of concerns. Certainly the mental health and addiction without any definition attached to it has raised a lot of concerns on the site. But I think, it's that narrowing the definition and understanding what that means in terms of the site design would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, so a couple of comments. So I guess first I would say that the mental health service is just one of a variety of services that were identified through the public consultation process. There's about 10 of them. And the feedback that was provided by the councillor around the community's priorities in the direction of seniors care, public health, community health. Those are in alignment with what we heard in our results from the community, and we also heard a lot of community members that were not supportive of mental health service. But that is one area, just one of a slate of a variety of health services that is being considered. In terms of next steps, as Mr. Lorette outlined in this presentation, really the next steps are to have some further discussion with Island Health around what a model would look like for funding and which health services they think are most practical and implementable based on those financial constraints. And then once we have that, then we would look at doing a schematic design and some blueprints of what those specific health services could look like on the site. And then that's what we would bring back to the community for them to have a look at. I think part of the challenge that we had in the public consultation process that we heard from the community was, well, you haven't decided what you're doing yet, right? I kept saying, yes, that's correct. We haven't decided what we're doing yet. That's precisely why we're having this discussion now, because we want your input before we have made any decisions. So no decisions have been made about what the health services are that are going to be on the site yet. So once we are able to take those next steps and have those discussions with Island Health, then we hope to have a schematic design that we can bring back for the community to provide their input.
Thanks for that clarification, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just extending on some of the questions that have already been asked, but just for the information of the folks from the community who are following the process and kind of want to understand about next steps, and you have covered this sort of in a higher level way, but if you could just provide a little bit of detail about sort of what the process is for it to go to the respective boards, the CRHD, Island Health boards, and how that process takes into account the feedback that you receive, and how you would envision that coming back out to the community. And in the interim time, while that process is underway, just if you could just provide some information about how the public would provide input directly to CRHD or others in the interim time before it comes back out to the public in a structured way, just so the public has that information.
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. You want to speak to the board? Mr. Lorette?
Yes. Thank you for the question. It's great to understand the process. And so what we would be doing is once we've had a chance, similar to meeting with the council today, is we would like to sit down with Island Health and get more detailed parameters around what makes sense going forward in the time frame that we have right now to advance the project. That's really gonna put some options on the table from a schematic design. With Island Health getting the commitment on the funding, and in absence of that, it would be agreeing on a partnership model. So we would then take that forward to the hospital district board on this is what the services on the site could look like. We'd like to take this back out to the community in another round of engagement and get their input, get the hospital district's input on the next steps proceeding based on what we've heard and what Island Health is ultimately hospital district has to approve what that would look like on the site and enable us to get back out to the community. And as we report through to the hospital district and bring reports through, there's an opportunity for residents or any of the public to provide comments to the hospital district. So again, similar to this process where they can come and provide comments to this council, they can provide comments as well to the hospital district. But then we would go through a detailed advertising process through our channels to get out and try to get as much notification that we'll be back out into the community and presenting that third round of engagement. Mr. Burns, I think you have some addition you want to add?
Yeah, and I'll just add that we do take the information. So if we hear as a whole, for an example, that the community is opposed to health service A, and I won't name one, we would, and in our discussions with Island Health, we would bring that information with us so that they were aware of what we heard. And same with the CRHD board as well. They'll have that information as well when they're making decisions and providing input into schematic design.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, and I appreciate those comments. Just in terms of the comments about Just to confirm, we're talking about when we return back to the public and start sort of workshopping some of those options, or sort of return back to have those kinds of discussions. We are talking about a discussion both about usage and also potential design. So we're talking about both of those things, just to confirm that that's the case.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have Councillor Zelka, and then I have a couple of questions. I'll go back for a second time for anybody who has some follow-ups. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks through you to the proponents, or rather the CRHD. I guess that makes you a proponent, bringing forward the feedback from your initial community consultations. Thank you so much for the reports, and I'm finding your website very, very helpful. The having everything up there at the crd.bc.ca website with the various reports and the background materials, incredibly helpful. So I very much appreciate also the comments of all my various council colleagues and the incredible amount of email that we've got. I'm very pleased to hear that you're going to be getting a copy of all of this stuff that you'll be able to sift through and add in to and flesh out some more aspects of community consultation. Knowing that maybe you'll be able to get that 63% from Oak Bay number up a bit higher, maybe potentially with our help with this input material. So the question I wanted to ask was, I see from your background material on the websites and various information that's available on the CRD website, the general mandate of the CRHD, is sort of described in one of your reports with a steam shovel of some sort, or a shovel. Essentially, you do a building design, construction, and ownership, effectively like a contractor doing a design build. And it seems to me that your customer is the health authority. Is it more than that in terms of your mandate?
Go ahead, Mr. Barnes.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's just one of the models that we pursue. I would say that our mandate is to provide the local share of health capital infrastructure for the region, and we do that in partnership with Island Health. We have a 10-year capital plan that we support and fund a percentage of, and in cases where Island Health does not have capital resources available, then we pursue other innovative models where we would become essentially the contractor and do a design build, and we may own the land and own the building. Those are fairly innovative approaches, and one that other local governments are also considering as well. So that's one option. There's also scenarios where we're simply a granting agency and we provide our local share of health infrastructure by providing grants. So the design build model is one of the approaches that we can consider.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Zelka.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So it sounds like you're both the money and to some extent either the builder or the contracting aspect of the building, and to ensure that something gets built, and it's usually in the health area, CRHD in terms of your name, of course. Your primary customer, of course, is the public through the Island Health Authority, who's actually delivering the healthcare services. So with respect to that sort of context, I understand from my colleagues up at the CRD that Island Health has not completed their assessments. How do I say this? They've done the regional needs assessment. I have a sense that with respect to what's moving forward in terms of strategic planning and needs assessment, that there's a bit of a parallel aspect going on here. It looks to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that while you're surveying stakeholders and stakeholder agencies and those sort of things, and just seeing what the community will potentially be open to, and also what the community will not be open to. At the same time, the primary customer, the health authority, is apparently working on the regional needs assessments and various other strategic initiatives to try and then, of course, to get that alignment between what they want and what you can provide. Since I understand that basically you work together to align health service planning with facility needs in the capital region. And I'm quoting from your background document. Have I got it fairly accurate, or is there more nuance to the situation, please?
Go ahead, Mr. Barnes.
I would say you have it fairly accurate, and there is more nuance to it. I think you're correctly identifying that Island Health is a large, complex organization, and that their primary role is in health service delivery. And as anybody who's been in the healthcare system understands, acute care tends to drive the priorities and get the resources. I think there are staff within Island Health whose jobs are to do capital planning and to meet the needs of the region long term. And at the Capital Regional Hospital District, our mandate is to help support that by providing the local share of health infrastructure. So you're correct that Island Health has their own parallel process, both in terms of identifying needs assessment, but we do try to work together when it comes to capital planning for the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka, if you have anything else.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. So I'm leading these various comments just in confirming that my understanding is correct. Will lead up to the eventually I'll get to a question. With respect to context, if I remember correctly, the last time I guess Island Health CRHD was essentially before Oak Bay Council with something to do with that lodge. It was Baptist Housing, which I got the impression was contracted by the CRHD essentially to do the work and probably to do the design build work as well. And as we all know, that didn't go well at council with respect to our work on rezoning, permits and approvals and those sorts of things that you've allocated as responsibilities for District of Oak Bay. I just wanted to ask with respect to, shall we say, the history on the site and the fact that Oak Bay has been rather negative to some of the approaches, that it's very, very good ideas that have come forward from CRHD, its agent, I guess, which would be Baptist Housing, and of course the needs of Island Health. Is this process in any ways sensitized, or shall we say you're being informed by the fact that District of Oak Bay has said no quite dramatically on 2 separate occasions, which of course caused Island Health and CRHD to make some rather major changes to their plans moving forward?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't know if CRHD was involved at all in the previous go-round. Mr. Lorette, do you have any knowledge if there's any CRHD involvement in that go-round?
I know the regional district was involved in that go-around. We were, the main applicant with Baptist Housing on that. We're looking at this round as an open opportunity for what's the best for the community and the best for the hospital district. So we're not really brushing it with the past experiences on that. We know councils change, boards change, and we're just looking at what is the opportunity that we can at this time in 2021 going forward provide a health facility on the Oak Bay Lodge property.
Thank you, Mr. Lorette. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Excellent. If I may, one last question then, or the fundamental question. While I'm extremely interested with the community engagement that you're pulling together and providing the details on, in terms of making it less scant and less thin, and providing quantifiable data so that we can actually do some analysis along with you. I am very much also looking forward to what will be provided on the Island Health, the Vancouver Island Health Authority side, in terms of what are the actual identified regional needs assessment and what's being identified from in terms of the health needs that are being pulled towards that particular site or in the area. When might we get a view? And I know you can't speak for Island Health, but you must have some inside knowledge in terms of your primary customer, in terms of when their needs will become known, so that what you're building will actually satisfy those who will then be operating it.
Thanks, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Barnes.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's part of the next steps is that we're going to be having those discussions with Island Health around what funding looks like for their health service priorities. I certainly would absolutely encourage Oak Bay and those that are interested in getting more information from Island Health to approach them directly, as I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Follow up, if I may, please.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
So with respect to that, how could we follow up with Island Health? Would we have to go through CRHD, or would we approach them directly? What would the process be to follow up on the regional needs assessments and to get the details, and also, of course, the strategic planning that's related?
It's an interesting question. At the end of the day, it's their timeline that we're beholden to, and it'll come to the hospital district almost certainly as a first step. Mr. Barnes and Mr. Lorette, any add-on to that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one to ask or to answer. I think I mean, I'm certainly happy to carry that message to their staff that Oak Bay Council is interested in getting more information on their needs assessment. So certainly we can do that on a staff to staff level. But there are other opportunities and avenues to approach Island Health as well that I would encourage you to pursue.
Okay, thank
That would
you.
be
In a
very-
more
very
informal
helpful.
fashion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you.
I think this is one of those areas where we all have relationships and we want to make sure we're using them to do it. I guess this falls over to me, and then I'll go back to second-time callers. Just for my clarification, there is a project page at crd.bc.ca/Oak Bay Lodge. Is that form still active? If people submit things there, that will still get through to the appropriate bodies?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, because I've been pointing people there, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't wrong. I'll just provide a little bit of feedback. I think some of the on the consultation, I think the generalized feedback at the beginning, where people may have some specialized knowledge, things like the police is a good example, had almost nothing to comment on in the general first round of consultation. But as soon as sort of, mental health and addiction services, those have significant impacts on services and the ability to provide those services. And so depending on what that mental health and addiction services look like, if they're low barrier housing, et cetera, they can have major impacts on the operational needs. So I think as those things get flushed out, those have to come back just for those commentary pieces, because I think that is a bit of a gap. I guess my only is really a comment. I'll pose it as a question. Do you feel like in that third round of consultation, as it comes back, will Island Health be available to talk to some of the questions? Because I think a lot of the questions are going to be nuanced questions about how those services are delivered and what they look like and what the needs are.
Yes, I hope so. Certainly Island Health has been very willing to participate. They participated in the second round, which was one of the pieces of feedback that we got in the first round, is that they wanted to have an opportunity to ask Island Health questions, and so Island Health did agree to participate in the second round. So certainly we will try to make sure they participate in future rounds of engagement as well.
Thank you very much. I would highly recommend that. I found going back all the way to 2012 with the old Oak Bay Lodge application, there was a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about what the rules were and what those health deliverables were and what that impact on the building was and things. So just having that information readily at hand and available for questions, I think is really worthwhile, especially in that consultation phase. And I guess I'll just leave it as I certainly see and appreciate the fact that you're walking a line here. The hospital district, which I mean, obviously I'm a member of the hospital district board, but that board ultimately has a responsibility of meeting this healthcare needs of the region, recognizing, of course, some of the local aspects. This council has to look at the regional needs, but more of an emphasis on what are the impacts on the local. Your job, obviously, is to do this in a cost-effective way that meets all those needs and balances those. And of course, there's third parties as well that may ultimately get involved here to provide some of the gaps in some of these services. So maybe I'll just ask: is there still, for clarity, room in this process for other, care providers? I'm thinking of things like hospice or some of the things that are more delivered through other societies and things that may meet some of the same healthcare type, seniors care type needs. Is that contemplated within the options going forward as well, as to fill in some of those gaps?
Yes, absolutely. We haven't ruled out any of that yet. That will largely be determined on the extent, sort of the size and scope of the health services that Island Health requires and is able to put on the site. And then we would look at augmenting that if there was opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess my only other comment, just to put it bluntly, based on the feedback we've heard on this, there's so much concern about the mental health and addiction. That's the hardest part of that piece to fit into here to get approvals, and that piece is through. So I think that just has to be very clearly laid out about what that means, what that looks like, before any other phases come through, because it just has so much impact, potential impact, depending on what that. And I think your Glen Glary model is a very different one that I think people are visualizing, because that facility obviously exists quite comfortably within a residential neighborhood, but it's not, I think, what people are visualizing when they're thinking about those words. So I have Councillor Braithwaite and Patterson again for a second time.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. You actually kind of touched on one of the things I wanted to ask, because you were talking about if it's Island Health funded or a partnership model. And in the partnership model, the Mayor touched on it a bit, that would be something like a hospice or a Kiwanis Pavilion coming in and partnering with Island Health for those services that they offer.
Mr. Lorette?
Yeah, it could include that model that you've just indicated, where another partner comes in and offers a service that's complementary. It could include the CRHD being the landowner and developer, and then entering into a long-term lease with the service provider being Island Health, which we did in the Summit model. It could be bringing a third party that's got a complementary offering if there's not enough health services on the site. So there's a lot of different options. Ultimately, we want to land what the health sector on the site is first, and then that'll inform what future opportunities we may need to bring to the table.
So from that, I take it that it's you that would approach those other organizations, not Island Health. Island Health would make the decision that they didn't want to fully fund, let's just say, and then would it be up to you to then go and approach the other organizations to see if they wanted to participate?
Yes, one of the things that we could do is once we had a general idea of what could be offered on the site, we may put out a request for expressions of interest for people that want to come to the table with a proposal on something that could work to the site. So none of that is ruled out at this point. We'd have to work through our process and find out, ultimately as the hospital district, the best outcome would be to do a full health services on that site, and Island Health is the operator, but we need to get to that stage first.
Thank you. And again, touching on something the Mayor talked about, obviously that was the area of the biggest concern, was the mental health and addictions idea that could be on this site. And I work for a nonprofit that supports mental health and addiction organizations, and so I know full well that to have those wraparound services, you need to be almost in the core usually. So it would be interesting to see how a model like that would work on a piece of land like this, but going to the other Glengarry, is it you said? That might be something totally different, and so that would form a bigger explanation, I think, for the public.
Yes.
And then my last comment would be the correspondence. So people can correspond until early 2022 before the additional consultation. Is that when the additional consultation would take place? Like if I'm looking at your timeline, it looks like you're saying that in late 2021 or early 2022, you're going to prepare and submit a design and development permit to the District of Oak Bay. Would the consultation with the public take place before that or after that? Just so that the public is aware of when their next opportunity for major consultation is.
Yeah, what I had mentioned in my closing comments was that we really need to land that health component and be able to mock up some schematic design work. And I know that report or what you were reading indicated early 2022, and a lot of it's hinging on when we can get the commitment from Island Health. So that timeline might get pushed back, but once we actually had a schematic and a concept, that's when we would get back out to the community, and that would help inform our rezoning application to the municipality.
Thank you, but correspondence is of course able to be sent to you up to and including that time.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to our guests here. Both Mr. Barnes and Mr. Lorette touched on the funding and some of the solutions that might needed to be sought in order to have funding. I guess I'm interested too in that the Oak Bay Lodge that you are disassembling now really fell into quite a state of disrepair, unusable areas, and so I'm wondering if we could also hear not only about the initial sources available for the initial capital funding, but what about the long-term funding then for a project like this? What are the sources of the long-term funding to ensure that the facility has good sustainable funding going forward to make sure that it's maintained in a more proactive way than the last building was?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So in order to secure the capital funding, we would require that the operator essentially guaranteed their operating dollars for, it would be 25-year lease or 40-year lease, the term of what we would expect the life cycle of the building. So if it was a partnership with Island Health, we would expect them to do that, and part of the agreement would include, life cycle upgrades to the building, etc. And in some cases, like at Mount View Heights, we have an agreement with a nonprofit operator, and same thing where they're required to guarantee the operation of the facility.
Thank you,
And
Councillor
just
Patterson.
a follow-up, and then who would be responsible for administrating the care of the building on a longer term?
Mr. Burns?
It would depend on the nature of the agreement specifically, but for the most part, the operator is responsible for day-to-day things related to the building. There are some things that would be the responsibility of the landowner, depending. I don't want to get into the intricacies of it, but
I think that depends on the model used as well as that, yeah. Great, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the explanation. I guess it raises some questions for us as we go forward and look at it from a land development perspective. If I look at the three options, I'll start with option 3 because it was the smallest facility, and perhaps the narrowest scope because it had healthcare options, but was really more of residential, and there were some concerning items in that in option 3. Option 1 was a larger model, but still very related to healthcare. And then option 2 was the maximization of the site, which included the healthcare and related services and everything from independent seniors housing, daycare operations, and even commercial. So, at least from my perspective, that option would have the perhaps the greatest potential impact in some ways because of the greater scope of facilities it would operate. And so the question is, Mayor, if that would have the greatest impact to Oak Bay as a district, how do we work with CHRD or with other users that then I guess would become your tenants to understand what the impact is on the district, and so from the district's perspective, how everything will flow, because I would think that one would impact everything from transportation issues to just traffic flow in the area, pedestrian traffic flow, and it's a fairly small area, and we have schools either side of it. So I think that would have the most impact. How do we work through, in a practical way, how do we work through these issues as a community?
yeah, thanks for that. So I want to stress that first and foremost, the CRHD's mandate is really around the health service delivery. So it's only in the event that the size and scope of the health services essentially wouldn't justify the cost of the land, where we would have to pursue those other types of services on the site. We did hear very clearly from the community that is their least favorable option of the three, as you saw on the slide. But in terms of opportunity to provide input into that, it would be through the rezoning process, because if we did get to a place where we were pursuing that, as Mr. Lorette mentioned, likely what we would do is we would say, just as an example, okay, X number of space would be for health services, and this is the X number of percentage of space we had remaining, and then we would do like a request for proposals to see if we could get nonprofits or housing providers or whoever it may be to come in and provide proposals for how they could use up the balance of the space. And then once we selected one of those, then through a schematic design and then coming back out to the community and the rezoning process is where Oak Bay would have input into whether or not they saw that as a fit in their community and the various implications around traffic, et cetera, that it could have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those answers, and I have no further questions.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, you can, if I have one more follow-up.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I just remembered something that I had meant to ask, and that was if you could remind me what there's a covenant on this land, is there not?
There is.
So can you remind me what that covenant is?
Mr. Barnes is probably more familiar with the legal language than I am.
So there are two covenants. One is a long-standing covenant that indicates that it's essentially for seniors' use, and the second covenant is that the land be used for public good.
Thank you for that. And my understanding is that the intention would be that through the rezoning process that the CRHD will ask to either fully remove or to change the covenants on that land to allow for the uses that are contemplated.
Yes, that's correct. The rezoning process would remove those binding covenants and allow the new proposed use if it gets approved.
Right. And in all likelihood, a dedicated zoning for the site as opposed to just a general institutional use. Yeah, okay. But that process is whatever the application process is, so go ahead, Councillor
So if
Braithwaite.
that covenant did not, well, never mind. I was going to say if we didn't agree to remove that covenant, then certain uses could not be put on that land. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up on this. Oh, do Councillor Zelka, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak a second time. At this point, it would be awesome if the proponent could maybe give an indication whether things like, will there be an emergency room or is there anticipation of ambulances racing to the building to drop off patients? I'm just from a just a general perspective and just in terms of setting expectations of the public. Do we need to make any changes or maybe accommodations to our roads to allow these potential services that may be coming?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Barnes.
At this point, those aren't health services that are being contemplated for the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I will, I think I'm
Mayor
gonna,
Murdoch?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, just a couple of follow-up comments, if I may, and I thank again both representatives from the CRD, but I just wanted to follow up on a point that Councillor Braithwaite made, and that is on a third, fourth, or fifth round of consultation. I'm hoping for more, not less, of course, with the community, but I would urge the CRHD to include Island Health Services in the next round of consultation. I think the kind of detail that the representatives have provided tonight would have helped to clarify some of the confusion in the community about what was being proposed. Excuse me, and I think it would be very beneficial. We all know that the quality of consultation will determine often the community buy-in on a facility like this, and I think it's essential that while this may serve regional needs as well, the adjacent neighborhoods and the immediate community around the site, it would be very beneficial to have their buy-in ultimately. So that those would be my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I think I'm going to just seek a motion. I think it's appropriate to direct me to write a letter just to reflect some of the comments that appear in the public input to date that we've heard from directly, and then just leave it that general, and then we can take that back to the CRHD board.
So I'll make a motion to that effect.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that motion?
I'll make that motion.
We seem to have a little lag here with you, Councillor Green. Sorry, we have hands up in the room, so I'm just going to those for convenience sake. My apologies.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay. It's all good. I don't see any other discussion on that motion. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Just to ensure as well that all the correspondence that we have received so far will also be passed along to the CHRD.
Yeah, we'll have staff do that. Doesn't need to be part of this motion. We can just make that direction. So, it's not seeing any other. We'll just. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
So, Councillor Braithwaite asked my question. Thank you very much. As long as all of the correspondence gets through, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll call that question. All those in favor?
And Mayor, just a question,
go ahead.
if I may.
Yes.
I have my submission written in very large font, but I'm happy to share it with the CHRD if that's appropriate. Thank you.
You may do so. I think what we'll seek for from this motion is more of a group comment as opposed to an individual comment, but this does not preclude the individual comments from going forward as well, Councillor Green. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I don't anticipate any other motions, but I'll just make a final comment here. First, thank you for coming. Unfortunately, sometimes when there's silence, everybody starts worrying about what's going on. So any update of this nature is very appreciated, and I think anything you can do to keep the public and in general aware of what's going on, that's always appreciated. So thank you for this update. I also just want to express I've had many conversations with the staff and members of the CRHD board. And there is and I understand from Island Health as well, there's a general intent here to come up with something that works well for the community and for the region. So I'm very appreciative of that good intent. And I know it's sometimes hard with 1,000 moving pieces to make it all come together. But I do appreciate that goodwill and that good intent and the efforts made to be clear. And I hope the feedback we've given a little bit around this table in terms of what worked and didn't work in the consultation will inform the next round when it happens. But certainly, from my perspective, I'm very appreciative of just the fact that you are, including us in this notification, even in these early stages of consultation and feedback, because it's certainly not required at any point, but it's very much appreciated. So with that, I think we can just say thank you. Should we receive have a motion to receive the presentation, Ms. Williams?
Certainly, there's no harm.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. That took a little longer than I was anticipating, but obviously there's a lot of interest in this right now, and very excited about seeing this move forward.
Thank you.
We can text Councillor Ney, but I just got a text from her saying that she is going to exit and go on to her next meeting. So maybe we can bring her back for a few minutes and then she can exit more formally than just a recusal. Thanks again, and have a good evening. Drive safe in the rain. There she is. Welcome back, Councillor Ney. Well, I understand you have to leave very shortly, so we'll just go through the other pieces here. I thought you might want to hear just some of the comments from the public on the Sustainable Infrastructure Plan, Replacement Plan. But I understand you have to leave us a bit early tonight. Is that correct? You're muted at the moment.
Sorry. Yeah, I have to leave by 8:30, but I thought this was a good juncture, but
Oh, you can leave anytime. Just if you want to leave at this point, you're more than welcome to, Councillor Green or Councillor Ney.
okay.
All right, so we'll mark you as out of the meeting at this point, and
Okay.
I know you had a long night of meetings ahead of you, so good luck with
Yeah.
that, and we'll talk to you
Okay.
next week.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Okay, so moving on to item number 5.2. This is an interesting one in that we had invited public input to our special meeting that talked about this. We didn't have much. We had written, but no call-in public engagement, and so we had feedback that at least one, if not several people wanted to talk and weren't able to. So we thought we would open it up for the public to call in. And so again, we're just welcome those who wish to call in or to raise their hand within the meeting. If you're on the Zoom call and you wish to speak, you can use the app at the bottom that says reactions and just use the raise hand. And if you're online, you can hit *9 to raise hand, and both will show up on the screen here, and we can allow you into the meeting. Now, our streaming is a little bit delayed, upwards of a minute or more, so I'm going to make the call for input at this point and invite people to call in or to raise their hand within the Zoom. We did receive a couple of pieces of correspondence here as well later in today, so I just wanted to make sure people were aware of some additional written correspondence that came in today on the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan. So great, I have two who have called in.
Point of procedure, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. A point of procedure with respect to this community input provided as on item 5.2. I was wondering if staff could just to share very briefly how our procedures bylaw allows this when the public input was not allowed on the previous item, please.
Sure, Ms. Williams is not in the room, but I'll go to Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this really is provided as an opportunity for the public who we've been indicated we're trying to get in. It was the best place to put it on the agenda, and as I don't have my corporate officer in the room, I'll apologize. But it was an attempt to ensure we have public input, whereas the item previous to this was really council being provided information, and then more engagement on this subject certainly is forthcoming when the matter becomes a district one. So for this one, again, we just wanted to make sure those who were attempting to contact council were afforded the opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Ms. Shaw first, if we could, and invite them into the meeting. So you can unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. And there we go, unmuted. Welcome, Ms. Shaw. If you could just state your name and municipality of residence, and then you have, we normally sort of say about 3 minutes per speaker, although it's not fixed for these kind of inputs. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. My name is Maureen Shaw. I'm a resident of Oak Bay, living on McNeil Avenue. First, I would like to just thank you very much, thank the staff very much for the work on this report. I unfortunately sort of got it rather late. I somehow missed it when it first came out. So I only haven't had the in-depth read of it that I would like, but enough of it that I certainly appreciate the expertise and the time that went into the report. I did send you an email letter later on today, and again apologize for the lateness of that.
We did receive it, just so you know.
It is a really long report and requires a lot of careful thought and consideration, but I do have a few comments that I'd like to make. Firstly, I would just say that, you know, while the numbers are very impressive and are very important to our understanding, the plan needs to acknowledge the impact on the lack of action and in the past years, and on the health, safety, and well-being of all of us as citizens of this district. I honestly don't see this plan as a 100-year plan. In my experience, a plan must have an action plan with costs and timelines, and I don't see any of that. As a resident and a ratepayer, I understand that we might see action on the significant risks that are identified in a report and previous reports, such as the Opus report of 2015, and the impacts experienced by residents and businesses. I would like to see that. While this is a far-ranging report, I also would like to have a report that looks at the near and medium terms. For example, a comprehensive 10-year plan with an action plan. I really would like to see an action plan. As you're aware from our previous conversations, we've had in our home and in our neighbors, we've had significant flooding issues, and our drainage infrastructure is of paramount importance to us. With a drainage funding gap of 72.3%, the report shows the immediacy in dealing with the storm master plan. Further, the drainage funding gap accounts for 116.7 million according to this plan. And it also says that the district currently has no reserves dedicated to drainage asset replacement. Not that the other infrastructure issues are not important to us, they definitely are, but certainly with the risks and the funding gaps identified in the report, drainage is of high importance. In the 2021 budget estimate, 12 million was required. I want to know just how many of these dollars have been awarded and what the projects are that have been funded as a result. And are we looking into a multi-year planning and awarding contracts to be competitive and to get our best value for the dollars to keep projects moving so that we get things done? In the report, climate change is noted, but it's not really considered. And I would suggest that climate change must be a key consideration in the plan and should be really paramount in the action plan. From a governance perspective, I would suggest to you that it would be failure for it not to be. This is a significant risk to our community from a financial perspective and a planning and a strategic and really a legislative and execution perspective. Future development and zoning review will have to be included in the plan. I mean, it just is, really, I can't understand why this would not be absolutely paramount. I don't know how we can continue to density, how we can continue to be having new homes and additions to homes and so on done without these incorporated into a plan. I want to say that my husband and I, we have no problem in paying our share to move forward. However, we do need to know we will be able to experience the benefits of the improvements and not just paying for our future generations. We need some action now. We are the experience and the failure of past council's lack of funding and underfunding of the assets. That's what we're seeing today, and we would like to see some results. I also would like to just comment briefly on public consultation. Beyond the questionnaire, I just think the questionnaire is totally inadequate, and residents must be educated and informed about the issues in order to make informed decisions and on the risks and the costs. And I hope there'll be very careful consideration of the process for consulting with us in the community. I would just like to reiterate a previous suggestion that I have made to staff, that communication is critical. And I must say that Councillor Green tonight said that consultation makes or breaks a project, and I absolutely agree with that. And the risk of not doing so could really be catastrophic. Also, we need to, as I mentioned, said to staff in previous communications that we're entering the storm season. We all know that. And communication piece that outlines what the district has done to prepare for this season and what we recommend homeowners and business do to mitigate future damage is really important. I'm not suggesting that all the responsibility falls on the shoulders of the district. We as citizens have responsibilities, and there are things that we can do that are really pretty simple. So I think that a communication piece at this time of the year would be really beneficial. And I had shared that a number of months ago, some information that the staff might want to share. I also would like to say that while I know I can sound somewhat critical, and I hope it's taken in the positive light that I intend it to be, I also like to say that we have noticed in our area a lot of activity with cleaning out of storm drains and other work that I'm not quite sure what it was because we weren't communicated with. We want to thank the municipality district of Oak Bay for this and hope that it means that we might have a dry winter and no more floods in our homes as we have done in the last few years. And I thank you very much for the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Shaw, for your comments. We have another hand up. But before I go there, I might just turn to Mr. Haran, because in the presentation portion of it, he talked a fair bit about this being one part of a suite of reports and planning documents. We have another one coming up with a more detailed plan in early part of the next year that will help flesh some of this out. But I think as you raised the questions, Ms. Shaw, I think it's probably worth just if Mr. Haran, is Mr. Haran with us this evening? Maybe, can you just give a very brief overview of some of the documents that this is leading into and the nature of this report in terms of its fluidity over time to address things like density, climate change, etc. Welcome, Mr. Haran.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll do my best here. The Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan is the name given to what we consider a long-term financial plan for in terms of the asset management strategy, the program. So it's one project of a series of a number of projects to address the infrastructure challenges that we have in Oak Bay. So one of the biggest hurdles that we have to leap over as we deal with asset management in Oak Bay is that we only have enough resources to focus on one or two things at a time. So up until now, we've focused on some fundamental core activities such as condition assessment program and a couple of the master plans like sanitary sewer and water master plan and so on. And then the uncomfortable part is every time we make a leap forward and deliver a really great product, the question then arises, and it's a good question, of, well, where's the next part and where's the next part? So as we deliver this long-term financial plan, the question is, well, how do we do this now? How do we go ahead and tackle these infrastructure challenges? And they're not something that we're able to do to make these changes quickly. So some of these things we've talked about in previous council meetings, one in June, and then when we first presented this in terms of what is required to now ramp up the capital output of the district. We're predicting between 3 and 5 times the amount of capital work per year is going to be as a minimum required for the next 10 or 15 years, and potentially more, because there is some analysis and work that we have to do to refine those numbers. But next steps are delivery of sanitary sewer master plan later this year, and then next year we're beginning the work on the sanitary or the storm sewer master plan, which are two more tools to help us start prioritizing for the 15 to 20 year timeline of what we start building and repairing starting next year, and then for the next several decades. That's our first step. And in a district like Oak Bay, where we didn't have those tools, there's no way to prioritize that activity before, one step at a time. But that's the way going forward. I hope that answers the question, Your Worship.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's important to know that this is we're not kind of done at this point. We're moving forward as with a whole bunch of projects. So, but I take Ms. Shaw's points very well taken in terms of the need for all these pieces to be put in place. Mr. Robertson, I have you up next. If you want to unmute yourself, you may join our meeting. The unmute flashed off for a second. You just have to do it again.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I thank you for the invitation to be able to do this, however remotely it may be. I have been a resident of Oak Bay for the last 4 years. I'm a retired professional engineer of many decades of experience. And up to this point, I have searched around to look for a document which would roughly be considered to be what has been filed. The absence of that has caused me just to shake my head. Prior to being here, I spent almost 4 decades in the municipality of Delta, which has gone through major infrastructure charges such as has been contemplated in this report, with one exception. They were a new community, but they still had to get all kinds of money to put this infrastructures in place, and I may make mention of that later on. The report itself was started in 2015, and it's taken 6 years to get to this point, and I can only shake my head and wonder, why did it take so long? Because surely we all recognize that the infrastructure we're talking about is at the end of its useful life. And when it's at the end of its useful life, the risk factors go way, way up, and you lose control over where you're going to spend your money because you've waited so long to do the facility replacement and replenishment. So I am astounded it's taken 6 long years to get here, and I really wonder what previous councils were up to in just sitting around and waiting for disasters to strike. But having reached the point where there is now a plan, I really want to encourage you to prioritize going forward. And I've heard the gentleman just before me speak about it. We are a small community, and if we do not have the resources to do the basic planning to get this thing in motion, then let us find outsiders who can be brought in. That's what happened in Delta, and it worked. They had a massive amount of debt to start with back in the early 90s, and if you go and look at their financial statements now, you'll find out they've paid all that off without horrendous costs through taxes. I also wanted to go on to say that the survey that's been out recently about this is really want for much improvement. There are some questions which ask, how do you want to fund this? And it gives a series of dates without any of the background. And I think that without that background, the survey is just wanton for misinterpretation. And I would really urge you to consider withdrawing it and redoing the thing afresh. I do want to, at this point, congratulate those who were the authors of the report, particularly Mr. Payne and Mr. Horan and all the others who contributed to it. The deficit and the financial needs that you are looking at in the order of $400, $500 million is absolutely horrendous compared to what we've looked at up to now. And I think we need to be very brave, and instead of backing away from that and pretending it's not there, get on with the exercise of putting a plan together to start working away at all of that. And to that end, I have to say to you that I understand there is less than a handful of people who were able to sit in on the meeting 2 weeks ago, and even with everybody in line right now, we're probably dealing with less than 1% of the population who knows anything about this. And when I go and look at Oak Bay News and some of the other things, the data around what is really needing to happen is quite absent. And the tax increase, significant as it's going to be, needs to be explained in some manner. And I have to say that I do not think a 90-page report is the crutch you want to work with. I'll close by saying that I think it's a major step forward to have this in front of you, and I really want to encourage you to move forward as quickly as you can, even using outside resources, to put the plan together to know where to go and get on the way. I know there's going to be tax increases, but you have a challenge ahead of you to either increase the taxes now or to suffer major consequences along the way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Robertson. I'm going to go back to Mr. Horan just on one point. The council obviously has caused some pain by increasing our taxes significantly over the last 4 years to try and get as far as we have. So that portion of it was there to allow us to do some planning. But I think it's just, I might go back to Mr. Horan to talk a little bit about all the very briefly, just the components that have gone forward to allow this to be as accurate as possible. He talked already about sort of next steps, but maybe just a little bit about why has it been 4 or 5 years since we first started this process to get to this step in the process, which will continue for another 4 or 5 years, I'm sure. Mr. Horan?
Your Worship, I'm sorry, I just missed a little bit of your question. Just I think internet chopping out. Sorry, could you just please repeat the question for me?
Can you just perhaps briefly overview this process of asset management was started about 5 years ago, and it's taken this report. Obviously, the comment from the speaker was just about this being 5 years in the making, and I just thought it'd be worthwhile just to talk a little bit about the steps that have gone into it and what information was required to get here, and just because we've talked about what's coming next, but perhaps a little recap of what's gone into this to get us to this point.
Oh, yes, thank you, Your Worship. Absolutely. I'll do my best. Back in about 2015, Council had directed the staff to set a priority to develop an asset management program, which included at the beginning a state of practice assessment, which is the report that is usually commonly referred to as the OPUS report, which is delivered in 2016 and brought to Council in early 2017, which really laid out the state of the district's assets in terms of the percentage that was in poor or very poor condition, and the likely initial assessments of the financial impact of how much of the total resources needed to be of total assets needed to be rehabilitated. At that time, there were a number of programs that were in place which needed to be completed before any aspirations to do a significant increase in infrastructure rehabilitation would have to be completed. So those would be the condition assessment programs, and then putting the policy and strategy in place about how is Oak Bay going to handle asset management, which included some significantly important decisions from the council starting in about 2018 to start setting aside some funds in an infrastructure reserve, even though the district hadn't had time yet to really put together the longer term plans for how to use those funds to address the infrastructure deficits. So that was the first few years. Then in about 2019, Council's priorities with respect to infrastructure was around consistent, predictable increases in funding for infrastructure replacement, such as water mains, sanitary sewers, storm sewer, and roads. And this was a fundamental decision, a fundamental step that had to happen in Oak Bay because at the time, the budgets for capital works were low enough that we were far below the targets that we would need to achieve to be sustainable, and the funding year to year was not predictable. So it was impossible for engineering and public works to plan more than a few months ahead in terms of which projects to do and where to prioritize effort, which was important because it meant that there was just a limit in terms of how much, which projects to, in terms of what you could tackle. So they couldn't do complex projects and you couldn't plan multi-years ahead, which means you had to do the easy stuff, which was not enough. So that's the kind of the background of what brought us to last year and this year, where we've done the amount of capital work we've done in terms of this infrastructure renewal program is more than we've done in over a decade. And we were able to use things for the first time, such as not only were our public works internal forces fully engaged in day-to-day operations and maintenance in our capital program, but we had to go out to tender contracts and have the private sector do storm main replacements, for example, and start building that capability within the Oak Bay team so that we could have different ways to do service delivery when it comes to project delivery. So those are all key steps where one step at a time, now we're able to predict ahead to say what kind of work do we need to do to expand even further in terms of how do we put together a program that is much more in terms of capital output. But we were not able to show that publicly or talk about it more until we developed until where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Horan. Just looking to see if there's any other, if anybody wishes to raise your hand within the, on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand to speak. If not, we have one hand that's still raised from an earlier speaker, but I'll just have that hand lowered. And just waiting to see if there's any other members of the public that wish to speak. I like just giving this a moment to... is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the item of the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan?
Hello?
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 Hello, did you wish to speak to this item?
Yes.
Okay, can I just get your name and municipality of residence? Then you may go ahead and then talk.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Mears from South Oak Bay. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Mr. Mears.
Okay, I'm not expecting an answer tonight on this information. I'm just acting on the information that has been available. So, like I say, I don't have all the information, and I don't expect an answer. I think it's just going to be food for thought for the councillors. It's not clear to me why 4 years ago or more I was in council and the BC Municipalities Financial organization showed up and said that there's money, quite a lot of money available to borrow. Now, I realize we can't borrow the whole amount, but there's certainly a substantial amount to be borrowed, and I just wondered what we were waiting for. It's been, it's a long time to wait for funding that we could be applying right now when we're spending a lot of money on fixing pipes and leaks and all kinds of things. And economically, if we can fix them and we're not spending that kind of money and time, it certainly makes sense to borrow the money now. It's a low interest rate and it's available. So I think there should be some action on that. The second thing I wanted to say is that, as a starting point, and like I say, I don't have all the information, but there's certainly a number of areas that there's been breaks in, that's been publicized anyway, that we could start on, like, for example, the Bowker-Cadbury area. There's all kinds of multi-dwellings, high-rises, and certainly the new giant overmassed Bowker, which all the committees were against, and the community was against, and half the council was against. That's going to be impacting on that whole area, and that would be a good starting point. There's also the Margate flood. We built quite a bit extra, a large hotel on top of the hotel that was there, the Oak Beach Bay Hotel. And certainly the big flood down at the south end of Hampshire. I mean, there's all kinds of development going on in Hampshire, and very large houses on small lots. So I think those kind of things we could start on with the money that we would borrow. Anyway, I think that's really what I wanted to say. And like I said, I don't expect an answer, and I don't have any. I know that some of this stuff's out of the scope of Mr. Horan and Mr. Payne, but certainly council could consider what I said. I just have one more quick item, and that is regarding, and I tried to get this a couple of meetings ago. I called the municipality, but I know staff is busy and they haven't called me back on it. The actual webcasting is not indexed, and it used to be in the old contract. And it's not that hard to do, according to, I've contacted iCompass, and they said they're surprised that that we're not doing it. It's easy to do, and they said if their staff contacted them, they could get it done pretty quick. So if you could have that, it's hard to plow through, 3 hours of meetings just to find out one of the items. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mears. I think if
Okay.
Mr. Payne is here and he can probably address the question of borrowing. It's not a question of whether we can, it's a question of timing that borrowing in a way that, so that question has come up quite a bit in terms of what lead time we require to enact that borrowing. But perhaps, Mr. Payne, you can just briefly talk to the fact of the process for undertaking borrowing and why we're not doing it just yet.
Okay.
Yes, I'm having a hard time hearing that, but I'm 4 years is a long. It was more than 4 years, I think. So that seems like a long time to get going. And I've heard from other people saying, other councils actually saying that we could have done that if there was some things we had to do, but we could have done those things so we could have borrowed. I mean, the money's there, and other people have borrowed it. It doesn't seem like we couldn't borrow it.
Thank you, Mr. Mears. Just for clarity, it's not a question of whether we can borrow it, but having a planned approach to replacement to use that money is necessary. Right now, we're able to do all the work in our workload with reserves, but we're going to have to go to borrowing to achieve the goals that are laid out in the plan. But Mr. Payne, you probably have a more eloquent statement than I do on that front. Sorry, Mr. Mears, I'm just going to let staff address the question. Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, you put it pretty well and pretty eloquently. I don't believe that the consideration of borrowing is really what's standing in our way. In fact, the The infrastructure plan anticipates that borrowing will be necessary. We won't be able to build up the reserves in time that the replacement needs to occur. So we'll certainly use the tool, the MFA tool, which is an exceptional benefit to local governments in delivering the plan. Really what we're working on in the short term is developing those capital programs to execute those replacements as quickly as possible. And certainly the Director of Engineering has been putting his mind to that. In fact, Council will recall that at the last meeting, Council resolved to ask staff to come back in Q1 of 2022 to report back on our capabilities to scale up that capital replacement program by 3 to 5 times of what's happening right now. And if we can meet that pace, there will be a point in the not so distant short term where we will require borrowing to execute that plan.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne.
Can I say one?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Can I
Mears.
say one more thing?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, just regarding development cost charges, I know that Mr. Payne knows a lot about that in Colwood, and they have a pretty good program in development cost charges in terms of new development. So, I mean, maybe we can get something going on that. We've had a report 3 years ago. That would be kind of nice to do too, given we have a reasonable amount of development. And you never know, that could increase. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure Council is aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mears. And yes, definitely those form part of the overall piece, but I don't think there's a space in the universe that allows us to get enough money from development cost charges to cover the hole that we have for infrastructure at this point. Is there anybody else from the public that wishes to speak at this point? If not, I'm going to move on to the next items on the agenda. Again, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. If you're on the phone, just hit *9 and it should flag us on this call. Or if you're in the Zoom meeting, you can just hit the reactions and raise hand, and that will pop up a hand on my screen that I can see someone wishing to speak. I don't see anybody else, and I don't see names on there that I think are people waiting or trying to get on. So I'm going to move forward with the agenda. If there's somebody who raises their hand and within the next minute or so, I'll go back, no problem. But in the interest of time management, I think I'm going to move forward with the next items on the agenda. So that moves us to item number 6, or section number 6 on reports and memorandums. So we have a couple of items on the agenda here under 6.1, Remembrance Day celebrations. We have Fire Chief Hughes with us, but I think I had actually asked Councillor Ney to provide a little overview of the summary of what the steering committee that looks at the Remembrance Day ceremony, because they came forward with a recommendation that the ceremony in 2021, this November, be held virtually with limited public access. But that's a change that isn't required by public health orders. It's really a question of risk tolerance that comes back to governance, and so that's like the next item coming back to this table for consideration in terms of direction on next steps. So I'll do my best to reflect what Councillor Ney told me and what I've heard from other members of that committee, which was they looked at a large number of aspects, looked at the uncertainty of the case rates in BC. We're concerned a little bit about the trends at that time as to where they were going, and in an abundance of caution felt that it was better to be safe and just do the streaming. No matter what, that streaming will happen. So the question really in front of us is, do we want to put some other restrictions on access? Do we want to have no restrictions on access? Do we want to make some recommendations outside? And we have some information on what's happening in other Cenotaph piece, but not very much. There seems to be a little bit of a wait and see approach around the region. So, but Ms. Williams or Mr. Chief Hughes, do either one of you, can you give us an update on what's happening at other ceremonies in the region at this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can take that one for you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
We did reach out to the municipalities in the Capital Regional District, and most are still hosting 2020 information on their websites. And the people I spoke with said there was still indecisiveness around the format for their areas going forward. Salish is hoping to, at minimum, repeat last year's program with their 50 dignitaries outside on their lawn, and the public not being invited, and the meeting would be, the event would be live streamed. In Sydney, the Legion handles their event, and so they have a scaled back event as well, and they'll be encouraging the public to watch on a live stream and not attend in person. Esquimalt attends the CFB Esquimalt event, and View Royal also joins in on that one, as they don't host an event of their own. At this time, there's no information out there on what's happening in those areas. Unfortunately, the rest of the municipalities in the region are all hosting 2020 information and really looking to have these kinds of conversations this week with their elected officials and try to forge a path forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. So there we have it. Really, this is just down for council's input and discussion and some direction, if we can, this evening. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand the concern in regards to this. However, I will say that we had a wonderful celebration of a Truth and Reconciliation celebration in more than one community recently, and I would have to say that it's the one that I attended. People were very respectful in their distancing from each other, and they were all wearing masks, and it was a wonderful time to be able to be together to come in thought and contemplation about that day. And I think for me personally, it would be lovely for us to be able to do the same in our community. I think with a few caveats. I think if something untoward happened between now and then, we would have the opportunity just to go straight to live stream. I think we should live stream and we should have in person. And I think if other communities, let's say like City of Victoria, for example, decided not to hold a ceremony, then I think we should relook at it as well, because we wouldn't want everyone who was going to attend the City of Victoria ceremony to then be coming to Oak Bay. So I think there's a few things in there, but my preference would be for us to have an in-person as well as having it live streamed for those who choose to stay at home.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I certainly appreciate the remarks by Councillor Braithwaite. It was very nice to have the September 30th gathering of the community, and people were very respectful. I guess a little bit of concern. It's always so gratifying to me in Oak Bay that at Remembrance Day, the turnout is really overwhelmingly good for a small community, and so it certainly emphasizes the importance of the event to the community. I like the idea of being able to have both in person or live stream, and maybe we could try and emphasize that there are elderly members of our community who this is a very, very important, meaningful ceremony to them, and to allow their participation, and maybe there will be other members of the community that will give up their space and stay home and watch it on the live stream for that. But it is a very meaningful ceremony, and so I hate to shut it down completely again. So I'd like us to find a way to expand it in a way that is safe, and I know that this really puts a lot of emphasis then particularly on our emergency services to ride herd on things, but I'd like to allow for some public participation, and hopefully members of the community will also take consideration to not overwhelm as they would perhaps in a typical year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Turn to other councillors for your thoughts on this, either online or in the chambers. No. Go ahead, Councillor
Mayor,
Green.
I tend to agree with. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. I tend to agree with Councillor Braithwaite. It would be wonderful if we could do something that was very safe and well supervised. That was an in-person gathering. I realize we have safety concerns, but I agree also with Councillor Patterson that that the community members in Oak Bay are incredibly respectful and have worked really hard to keep the community safe. So if there is any way possible that we could do maybe a combination of something online and something in person, I'm not sure how that would work or organizationally, but those are my feelings anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. My understanding is there's no logistical problem with doing the combination of live stream and in person. Chief Hughes, maybe I just get your confirmation on that. I know there were some people who attended even last year when the live stream was on. But is there any impact of having people attending on the live stream service itself?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, there wouldn't be difficulties from a logistical perspective as far as having this live stream and people in attendance.
Thank you very much, Chief. Other than the fact that the cameraman would undoubtedly block a bit of view from people standing behind, but that would be the piece. So go ahead, Councillor Green. Anything else you wish to add?
No, I appreciated that information, and if it is possible and it is safe, I think you know my feelings now. Thank you.
Thank you. No absolute safety in anything, but this is sort of the judgment call that we're trying to be asked to make here. Any other comments? I'm happy to go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I find this decision challenging, very challenging, and although it pains me to say it, and that I look forward to and I highly value the Remembrance Day ceremony every year, and really appreciate the opportunity to gather with the public, and want to get back to that as soon as possible. I think, unfortunately for me in this particular case, I have to lean towards the side of being potentially excessively precautionary, and would lean towards delivering the event as it was last year. And it brings me no joy to say that. Very, very unhappy to say that. I just think being put in this role to judge the relative risk, I think that the risk probably is comparatively low, but I also recognize my own ignorance about what may transpire, and I'm by far an expert, so I will lean towards the precautionary side on this one. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Any other comments? Councillor Zolke, want to add anything in here? I'll say my 2 cents then. If I look at the events that have happened of late, everything from the music in the park and the car show on the avenue and the reconciliation event, and how well behaved people were in those, although in some cases they probably needed a few more masks in the peak of summer. And I look at the public health orders, which ultimately I think do define our capacity and an acceptable risk on this one. I lean in this one to supporting the in-person. I think there's lots of room within that direction to still put out, as Councillor Braithwaite noted, just recommendations, for people, if they're coming, to please be double vaccinated, wear your mask, be respectful of distance, give, if you're comfortable doing it through streaming to attend that way, so that there's more space for people who are elderly and might need some additional space. I think we can message that, but my experience of those community events was they were in sort of grinds of days and weeks of sort of low. They were bright sparks of experience where people, just looked each other in the eye and saw that and shared that experience. And it's just part of normal human life that we've missed so much. I think we have an obligation to try and give that to people wherever we can, that we feel it's safe. And to my mind, in the daytime, in the nature of the gathering, where it's not a matter of sight lines and things, people can be spaced out and attend. I'm comfortable with that risk balance personally. I don't see any other comments here. Any other follow-ups? So can I just get a motion of some sort to reflect?
I move that we...
I think I'm trying to think of a good wording here as well. Just reflect that the council, Mr. Chief Hughes, this is not really a direct thing, is it? Or what's an appropriate word here? If if council wishes to see a mix of in-person and live streamed service. Ms. Varela?
Sorry, Your Worship.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff would take the direction to consider how best to do a hybrid approach for the Remembrance Day ceremony with appropriate safety precautions in place for staff attending. Does that serve Chief Hughes?
Through Your Worship, yes, that would work. We will need to have infectious disease protocols in place for staff as a workplace, but we would be able to do that. It would for a hybrid approach.
Okay, thank you.
So I would, and just before I make the motion, and that's also under the understanding that if things change, we can come back to this table and direct staff not to go forward with an in-person and just to stay with it. Okay, so I'll make the motion as Ms. Varela laid out.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this? Seeing any? All those in favor? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I think I feel sufficiently confident that staff will be able to make the calls around safety for us on our behalf, and if it ultimately turns out that there are challenges and issues that can't be overcome, I trust them to make that judgment call.
Yeah, thank you, and certainly we can be reactive as those things come up as well. All right, seeing that, ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Appleton opposed. That motion carries. So thank you, Chief Hughes, and to all your extended staff with fire and police that help out with that event for being amenable. Item number 2 is the 2021 annual bonfire celebrations. Again, we don't have a staff commentary on this front, but I think actually got a new piece of information today. So we've had notification last week that the BIA, the Business Improvement Association, won't be holding the trick and treat in the village for the concerns of all those unvaccinated walking in close contact. And I understand that from Councillor Braithwaite today that Kiwanis is concerned about hosting their event at the Scout Hall as well. You can maybe just touch on that.
Yeah, I did receive a question from Kiwanis in regards to the bonfire, and they mentioned that because they serve about 700 hot dogs in that small space of the guide scout house, that they were feeling a little bit uncomfortable, and all the protocols that they would have to go through. So I think that their inclination to not go ahead is probably a good one in this regard, with that number of children and that small space.
Okay, thank you. And this ties just to what's in front of us. That's ultimately their call, but whether or not we want to have the firefighters-led bonfire celebrations on the night of Halloween, again, just topic of conversation here. Is happy to go around the table here and see where this really is a judgment call at the end of the day. It's reasonable for it to fall on our shoulders and not on staff's shoulders when there's no public health orders that explicitly prevent these kind of events. Go ahead, Councillor
Mayor,
Braithwaite.
I would tend to agree with Councillor Braithwaite on this one. It is a very tight space, and as we know, children are not yet vaccinated. I think it would be very difficult to space children, and people tend to crowd around a fire, and spacing might be a real challenge. So I would agree that we should probably not do it. Thank you.
I'm not sure Councillor Braithwaite actually said that, but she had her hand to go, so I'll let her talk now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's dark. People will want to crowd around. It sadly is it's one of my favorite events. I love Halloween, and this is one of my very favorite events, especially judging the kids' costumes. But I fear that having that number of people in that small a space, especially when they go inside to get their hot dogs and their popcorn, etc., it's just not probably conducive to a good idea.
Thanks, Councillor Braithwaite. Any other discussion? No one seems to be disagreeing with that general feeling. I'm getting some nods around the table, so I think a motion here, just similar to the last one, in the direction, Councillor Braithwaite?
So I would move that we direct staff to not hold the annual bonfire celebration, sadly, on October 31st.
Thank you. Moved and
Second.
seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on that? No, thanks. I would just state my agreement. I think in the dark with entirely unvaccinated cadre people, it's a very tough one to approve and feel comfortable that health and safety can be managed, and without things like the hot dogs and things, it sort of lacks its charm in many ways, because you lose out so much. So, okay.
Hopefully, we'll have enough decorations around the municipality that people can walk around or drive around and have a look.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to come into the village around Halloween. All of the pumpkins will be up on the standards and decorations on the street, and certainly we know that the Christmas lights will be going up not long after that as well to light up the village. So, with that, I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Nobody's opposed. That carries. Thank you for that, and I appreciate those are awkward discussions. Good framework for the contemplation, other than your best judgment. So thank you. Up next, we have Mr. Payne, our Director of Financial Services, just with Major Crimes Reserve policy amendment. So, Mr. Payne, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. In 2020, the district began including a major crimes contingency budget line item in the annual financial plan. This contingency budget was equal to the accumulated balance in the major crimes reserve. The idea was that if there was an event that required significant additional policing, these funds could be accessed without an amendment to the financial plan, so we could be responsive to that need. Council supported the inclusion of it in the budget, but some members expressed the desire to place some policy limits on the use of those funds and how they would be accessed. Staff would note that launching a major crimes investigation is time sensitive and confidential, and therefore it's not practical to ask for council approval in advance. It's not advisable to disclose the nature of such major crimes investigations while they're underway. Recognizing that, staff have prepared some proposed amendments to the reserve and surplus policy to address that desire. These amendments include specific reasons that are outlined that would allow for the use of the funds. It also would require that the current year police budget surplus be utilized first. So if there was a forecasted police budget surplus, those funds would be used to fund a major crimes investigation before the reserve would be accessed. And then lastly, that this would always be contingent on approved financial plan. So council would retain the ultimate authority with a financial plan budget approval and could remove that contingency budget from the financial plan at any point if council wished. So with that, we prepared some recommended policy amendments, and staff recommendation is to approve the amended policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Are there questions of council for Mr. Payne on this? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate Mr. Payne bringing this to council and setting up a policy for it. Always good to have. I'm just wondering, though, if the criminal code actually, if it defines major crimes, and so rather than trying to list everything, if we couldn't just perhaps simplify it by putting any exceptional costs related to major crimes as defined in the criminal code, rather than trying to list. Like, there might be more items besides this. I'm certainly not well acquainted with all of the extra costs of major crimes, but just a question that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. If Mr. Payne can't answer the question, I can give my stab at it as my experience on the police board. Mr. Payne?
Yeah, Your Worship, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that. I would note, however, that the types of investigations outlined in the draft policy as considered major crimes by the police department, I don't know that it would directly correlate to all crimes in the criminal code. Some of those crimes, of course, could be considered minor and therefore would not be appropriately funded from the major crimes reserve. But I would appreciate your worship if you could add further context to that.
Sure. I think it's important to separate. So this is called a major crime because major crimes tend to demand these sorts of services. But it's actually, these are really tied to extraordinary costs that aren't contemplated within the police budget for investigative purposes. So with the service agreement with Salish, for example, there's well-defined sort of included services for detective work, et cetera. But there's also extraordinary costs that are flagged for things like running wiretaps and things that are expensive and long-running and aren't contemplated under the normal everyday business of policing. And so you'll see the list there. Really, it's not really defining it by the crime, it's defining it by the investigative services required. And really, it's a trigger system if it's deemed to be outside of the normal services defined within the service agreement and under normal police activities, then it would get flagged here and get charged to that reserve. So right now, it's basically being pulled at a surplus if that's required. There's a reserve put in place, recognizing that wasn't sufficient. But it has, and I'm feeling a little blushy here because we didn't ever flag this at the police board to just say what actually happens when we need this and how does that get pulled out. So it's very appreciative of staff flagging this and at least making an effort here to see that there's a policy attached to defining what those are.
So just as a follow-up then, Mayor, I take it that the short answer to that is there's not an easy way to simplify the wording of this, and it should be left as it's stated in the policy.
I think it's best to leave it as it's stated in the policy because it really identifies the key things that would trigger it. Plus, it does say other costs related to major crimes investigations as identified by the chief. So it does give that wiggle room if there's other things that aren't contemplated. But this certainly is the overwhelming number of things that would be normally contemplated in everyday or exceptional cost situations. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I thank you, Worship. I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I guess as it's a bit of an extension as to what's already been discussed. But by my read of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this relates specifically to extraordinary costs. It uses the term extraordinary costs. So when I see the word extraordinary, that means to me that is something which is outside of the approved police operating budget. Do I have that correct?
It's a good question. So the extraordinary costs are costs that draw, costs that are essentially aren't contemplated within the budget. So it's not as simple as saying it's not really a service definition because there's lots of investigations that are handled internally within Oak Bay Police. There's investigations that are handled through our partners at Salish Police in that agreement. But there are well understood extraordinary costs within the policing world that are it was interesting because I was part of the negotiations that went on with that agreement with Salish, and I thought that would be a point of contention. That extraordinary cost piece is well defined within the policing world in terms of where that kicks in. So there was actually it was very easily understood on all parties' side that these are areas that were not normal. Things like wiretaps and things just aren't normal parts of police operations. They have to go through a special process.
Thank you, Worship. And just as a follow-up to that, then you're describing that the extraordinary costs are in the policing world, and I don't know anything about it, but the extraordinary costs are fairly well understood and fairly well defined. And I don't have a problem per se with any of this, but I'm just wondering whether or not it might be possible to actually define or at least put some kind of parameter around what the term extraordinary means in this context, whether the policy could include some kind of contextual piece that related specifically to saying this is not ongoing operational funding, just for clarity to ensure that people understand what it means.
Well, I think policies that are clear are always well appreciated on those fronts. So Chief Bernardes could not be with us tonight for this, so he's a better and more thorough knowledge on this than I have. I know it only through the conversations that we've had at this level, so I don't see there being any objection to including language if that seeks additional clarity. I'm not sure what that language would be, though, so I think the appropriate course of action, if that's the will of the body here, to refer it back to staff just to get some clarification on is this sufficient, and if not, is there some plain language that could be used to define extraordinary in a way that a layperson reading this would understand the policy. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson. Oh, sorry, Councillor Appleton, you still have the floor.
Yeah, and I'll yield the floor just shortly. Thank you, Your Worship. So would it be possible, just for clarity, and again, I don't necessarily consider it to be a deal breaker as far as my supporting what's in front of us, so I'm just wondering whether or not I might be able to propose an amendment to the proposed to the recommendation here, suggesting that staff include a definition around extraordinary, or provide some context for the term extraordinary as used in here. Is that something that could be done so that staff can get on with it?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think we really kind of want to approve the final wording as opposed to half approving, because I think we just want to make sure it meets the needs of council. I think if we ask the question of staff to come back with wording that provides clear understanding. Is Mr. Bernardi's on the... Oh, Mr. Payne has his hand up. I'll go to you, Mr. Payne.
Your Worship, I just note that the draft policy lists the extraordinary costs as they relate to, and then it lists I through X of what those extraordinary costs may relate to. So it doesn't specifically say it's a definition, as Councillor Appleton is suggesting, but it does say undercover operations, wiretap, surveillance, forensic specialists, tech analysis, underwater recovery, et cetera, et cetera. So it does provide some pretty strict parameters about what extraordinary costs are meaning in this context. So I just offer that as a potential, as potentially answering that question.
I think those are listed. I think the question was just really the definition of extraordinary, where that kicks in. There's some effort made to cover that, where the complexity of the investigation is outside the budgetary considerations of the year. But I take the wisdom of this body at hand. If there's lack of clarity here, then perhaps there might be lack of clarity in the public as well, and for future councils who might be contemplating what this looks like. Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I would concur. I don't want to unduly delay this process, because like I say, I don't in principle have any problems with this, and I think it does provide a good definition of that. I think it would say that there is an item here relating to other costs related to major crimes, so there is a bit of an open-ended piece in there related to extraordinary costs that might be at the discretion of the Chief Constable. I've got no issues whatsoever with the discretion of the Chief Constable. I'm just trying to get a hold of that specific definition. So I'm not necessarily thinking it's a deal breaker, but I guess it's a shame that the Chief wasn't available, because I think it might be something he might be able to answer fairly quickly.
More ashamed that I can't answer the question more fulsomely than I can. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I share Councillor Appleton's thoughts on some of this, and appreciate too that this is actually a step forward in actually setting this out as in policy. So I do recognize that, and I appreciate staff and Mr. Payne actually putting this in. But going back to your comment about these would be extraordinary costs not contained in the budget, but under C it says, if there is not sufficient budget remaining in the current police year, then we'll go to the reserves. So in other words, some of these items could potentially be covered in the operating budget. So anyways, it's not a deal breaker, but it's just a little not quite as clear as perhaps I might have made it more ambiguous, actually, by not having the whole list in there and just putting extraordinary costs relating to major crimes. But it's not a deal breaker with me either. I can support it, and it's the intent of it.
Yeah, thank you. I will point. This is I think this is not a time sensitive issue, and I think if we want to send it back for staff to make any amendments to help clarify the language. That would be totally in order. You are all dipping your toes into the murky realm of civilian oversight of police services. This is a lot of what comes into it is the definition of things and trying to create policies and guidance for things that you're not allowed to see the specifics of in any single investigation or service. So it's an interesting one. I think we might as well get the language right so we're comfortable with it, and more importantly, that future councils understand that when they're providing their level of financial oversight, that they can do a sanity check and see if this was in keeping with the intent of the bylaw. So I think a motion to refer it back to staff for additional clarifying language. I don't think anything more than that is required at this point. Oh, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, we have no motion on the floor at this point. Councillor Zelka, can I just, sorry to interrupt, can I get you to speak up just ever so slightly? We seem to be having a very quiet you. And oh, it's on our end. My apologies. Go ahead and speak again normally.
Can you hear me now all right?
Yes, that's much clearer. Thank you. Sorry, that was on our end, not yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I appreciate that this has been added as a maybe a first stab at a policy in this area that's actually written down. I don't mind the way it's written, and what gives me room for this reserve to be worded this way is that the current Chief Constable and his staff have been so judicious in the use of taxpayer resources. This year, as mentioned in the report, they are returning a budgetary surplus of approximately $300,000. And if I remember correctly, was it 1 or 2 staff that they were able to eliminate? I was wondering if maybe the Director of Financial Services could remind us how judicious that part of the District of Oak Bay has been with our valuable tax resources.
Sure, I might actually touch on that. So the 2 positions, which were 2 detective positions, were essentially moved over into Salish and as part of a service agreement. But they were on the books in Oak Bay for many years, even though we didn't have those positions filled. So that changed the budget, and but the overwhelming amount of the cost savings this year have actually come about from savings in overtime through a number of changes, and really significantly the recent collective bargaining, which added the ability to have reserve constables to help fill in some of those overtime slots. Oak Bay Police, like all police forces, is really suffering from overwork. The police forces have carried overtime on top of overtime on top of overtime, which has caused people to break down, and then more people having to fill in overtime to cover those shifts. And we saw the news story in Victoria recently about the fact they've just run out of frontline police officers. And so this year, with the addition of these reserve constables, which are full police officers but only part-time, it's allowed them to fill in some of those shifts to give a reprieve to the staff, which has both made the existing staff healthier and happier, but also allowed for some of those overtime costs to be dropped. So you're quite correct. The current leadership of the Oak Bay Police has been, and the union leadership and the rank and file have all been wonderful partners at trying to find ways of being effective, providing effective policing within the parameters that they have.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, in light of this, the wonderful work being done on that end, I certainly don't want to nickel and dime someone who's returning so much to budgetary surplus. Thank you.
Thank you. I just need some direction from this table. If there's desire to send it back, we can do that. If not, we can consider the wording as it stands. Councillor Appleton, you were the one contemplating this, so we might as well test if the body wishes to send it back, or if they're comfortable with it as is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Worship. So I would make the motion that the policy be referred back to staff for clarification around the language of extraordinary costs. Thank you.
That's moved and seconded by Councillor Green. Thank you. Anything else to add, Councillor Appleton?
No, I will add, your worship, that I totally it's not an easy decision for me to make. Again, I would like to be able to just move it forward as it stands, but and because I've got total confidence in the leadership and with the Oak Bay Police Department to obviously make the right calls around the fund. That's not the issue at all. I would concur with your comments about putting a policy in place that may stand, unamended for some time, to have the language be as precise as possible right off the top. So that's my only motivation, and is not reflective on whether or not the reserve would be spent appropriately should that language not be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And I mean, going on what Councillor Appleton has said, I was actually fine with the wording, but I think that to get it even better, and as long as it's not going to tie staff's hands in any way, shape, or form in the interim until it comes back, I'm happy to support the motion.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Thank you. And just, it may well come back. The staff say, no, we can't define it any more than that because that's well defined elsewhere. But we'll just leave them to come back with those clarifications. I think I appreciate that. Is there anything else? Is that sufficient from staff's perspective that it'll go back and just for that to come forward?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Right, don't see any other hands up on this. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Zelka, was that opposed? Yes, okay. We have Councillor Zelka opposed. That carries. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to item number 6.4. We have these occasionally, a tree removal request coming to council. Mr. Heideley, you've been waiting patiently to introduce this item. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can, Mr. Heideley.
Great. As council knows, under section 13.2, as is stated in the report, permit reconsiderations of the tree protection bylaw, a decision made by the manager of parks with regards to the issuance or refusal of a tree permit allows the owner the right to have council reconsider the matter. And under section 9.2 of the tree protection bylaw, the manager of park services may issue a tree permit authorizing cutting, pruning, or removal of a protected tree for one of 10 reasons. And the Leyland Cypress located at 880 Transit Road is before you tonight because I felt that none of the 10 reasons for removal met the criteria set out in the tree protection bylaw. The one that came the closest is 9.2J, which states that the manager of park services is satisfied that the preservation of the tree will not meet the objectives of the tree protection bylaw or the urban forest management strategy due to inappropriate siting or species selection. So I didn't quite get to that point here, but I'll give you a little bit of history on the tree. So a permit was issued in 2017 to the property owner to reduce the Leyland cypress by 25% in height and spread. This pruning could be done annually to maintain the tree at a reasonable size, but it would certainly be a considerable expense to the owner. My experience with Leyland cypress is it's almost exclusively grown as a hedge, and I really can't remember a situation where somebody has actually selected it as a tree. It is the fastest growing conifer in the world, being a cross between Monterey cypress and yellow cedar. And this particular tree that is before you tonight, it's a multi-stemmed, and it appears to be a border tree where a portion of the lower stem does grow onto the adjacent property at 882 Island Road, Transit. Being such a fast-growing conifer, the tree can easily put on 3 to 4 feet of growth a year once it's established. And it really has a little bit of a general proclivity to having large limb failure under wet snow loads or windstorms, et cetera. So it kind of lends itself to a little bit of a high maintenance tree itself. Another comment that I would make about the tree, that it is suppressing the neighbor's English chestnut, which is growing just on the adjacent property. But in saying all of that, it is a tree that is It's well situated really at the rear right of the actual lot and is healthy in all respects. And it's before council tonight to contemplate the reconsideration by the owner because the owner has requested the removal. And I will make note that back in 2017, a Leyland Cypress did come to council on the adjacent property for reconsideration, and that was approved. I suspect that these two trees were planted probably at the same time, and instead of being maintained as a hedge or a sheared specimen, they've been allowed to develop to a tree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heideley. It's not clear in the report if there's an anticipated replacement of this tree if there's an approval for removal. Can you speak to that?
Yes, there would be a requirement for a replacement, and that would also include a $500 bond that would be held for a period of 1 year and then returned once the newly planted tree is well established.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Members of council, there are questions of Mr. Heideley? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not seeing in the report or any correspondence or anything attached that includes sort of justification or rationale for the landowner as to why they want the tree removed. So was that produced, or was it just that they didn't like it?
Thank you.
I think that it's more of a question that they didn't like the placement of the tree. Didn't like the incurred maintenance costs that the tree was beginning to cause, and my speculation would be the suppression of the English chestnut that is next door to.
Thank you, Mr. Heideley. Is the owner of the tree with us this evening?
I don't know.
Okay, I will go to staff then. Do we know, Ms. Williams, if the owner of the tree is with us? Just in case there's questions, I might direct them there that way. That really is a question that came up from Councillor Appleton towards the owner about the why.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. If you could just give us a moment, we will go through the participant list and see if we can identify the owner. We haven't been able to this point, but a quick review would help. Just one moment.
I might just move on and come back to that if that's all right procedurally with you. I think it would be helpful if they are here that we know that they're here and we can deal with that. Councillor Appleton, you still have the floor. Is there other questions?
Well, it's I guess somewhat related, but I just wanted to confirm with Mr. Heideley, the report indicates that it's not in conflict with any services or anything like that. It seems to be in an area where it's not impacting any services or structures. Is that the case?
That is the case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka. Yeah, I'm going to go to Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Green.
Sorry.
No, it's good. Go ahead, Councillor.
Is it, do I have the floor?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. I'm sort of quizzical, maybe not unlike Councillor Appleton. The fact that it's not affecting services and that it's at the back of the property and the tree appears to have some overhang over the public lands, being the back lane. I guess I just have a few questions then through you to staff. If there is a branch or something that is overhanging onto another property, can that other property owner remove the branch? And I presume under a certain size, there's no problem. If it's over a certain size, they probably need to get a permit. Most likely from you. Assuming that's true, what would the size of the branch need to be in order for a permit to be required for, say, the next door neighbor to take some of the tree off?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. That would be 10 centimeters or 4 inches for this particular tree. A permit would be required. So anything under that size, a permit is not required.
Quite reasonable, and at least with some of the mapping pictures I have of this back lane, some of those branches do appear to be rather small. I presume the owner or the nearby neighbor could get a permit from you for rather large pruning of this tree, maybe another 25%. And what would you say if they wanted to take it down by 25% or severely pull it back?
Thank you.
Certainly, we would look at that, Councillor Zelka. Where you run into a little bit of an issue is with the end aesthetics of the tree, because the tree is a very poor rejuvenator of new wood. So if you prune it too far back into old wood where there isn't a lot of foliage, you're left with a tree that is somewhat unsightly and can certainly begin to decline because of the pruning.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you, but the fact that it's right on the back line certainly doesn't well. I'm leaning much more towards denying the reconsideration at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green.
Oh, thank you, and through you to Mr. Hiley. And I don't know if this is a question you can answer, Mr. Hiley, but in a lot of cases, neighbors sometimes share the maintenance of a tree like that encroaches on one property or the other. I'm just wondering if this owner has approached his neighbor to perhaps share the cost of maintaining the tree.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't know if that has been a conversation or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you so much. Mr. Hidley, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Hidley, is the English chestnut a protected tree?
Yes, Councillor Braithwaite, it would be because of its size of over 30 centimeters measured at chest height, or 1.4 meters above ground.
Thank you. And so is that tree at risk because of the Leyland cypress?
It's not at risk, but it is a tree that is a little bit of a sun lover, and it's certainly being suppressed. If you look at that one tree on the adjacent property, you can see that it is beginning to develop a one-sided canopy because of the shading of the Leyland cypress.
Thank you. And then also in your report, you do say that the adjacent property 882 Allen Road, they had also a Leyland cypress that was denied for removal by you for the same reasons as noted in this report. But after reconsideration by council, the tree was removed. Can you give us a reminder of the positioning, et cetera, of that tree? Was it similar to this tree in position, or was there other reasons that council decided to allow its removal?
I think that particular tree was larger. It was 127 centimeters measured at 1.4 meters. And it was, I'm just looking at the permit now, removal permitted under section 612 as per council's approval. So that would have been under our old bylaw. I can't really remember the tree particularly clearly, but I think it was a larger specimen than the one we're talking about this evening. Taking into consideration that the one we are talking about this evening has been reduced by 25% back in, I think it was 2017.
Thank you. And then I believe that the house next door to me had a Leyland cypress that ended up having really bad root rot, which was something that happens to these trees, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is that something that you have known to happen to this type of tree?
Not so much with Leyland cypress. It's the other cypresses that commonly referred to as Port Orford cedars that are getting decimated by root rot throughout town. This tree is not susceptible to the root rots that the other cypress trees are very prone to.
Okay, thank you. This is difficult for me. I mean, I worry about the English chestnut, whether that as a protected tree is going to suffer because of this cypress tree. And knowing that you can't cut it back hugely without having it look not aesthetically pleasing kind of weighs on me as well. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear some other people's comments on this before I make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Can I just, for my clarification procedurally, under the old tree protection bylaw, there was a number of aspects that staff had freedom to make a determination on. if the tree removal request did not comply, then it came to council, but we still had to cite a reason within our parameters that would explain the rationale for approving it. I'm just pulling up the tree protection bylaw, but I think it's probably simpler to ask you the question, Mr. Hidley. I'm not entirely clear on what our limits of our discretion here is. I think the intention was always that there be some very clear rationale expressed as to any approval for any such removal. Can you remind us in the new tree protection bylaw, do we not have to cite a specific rationale or reason?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, but ultimately it is council's decision to be able to use Section 13 to make a decision, but we like to work within all the parameters within Section 9.2 of the bylaw. J is the new addition from when you make a comparison to the old bylaw, which does give you some room in regards to siting and species selection. So there's a lot of trees that are like large redwoods, for example, that are on small properties. You could make an argument sometimes with Leyland cypress that they're just not a good long-term fit when left as a tree. From my discussion with Chris Paul, the municipal arborist, we didn't quite get there with this tree there. We felt that it was appropriately cited and hence felt that we could not, from a staffing level, approve the permit for removal.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Braithwaite, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just one other question, Mr. Hidley, if I could, and through you, Mayor, to Mr. Hidley. What would be the approximate cost, if you know off the top of your head, for the pruning of a tree like this, and how often would it have to be done?
The cost would probably be about I would say $7,000 to $1,000 every second year or so to keep it at the size that it is now, maybe a little bit smaller, and just keep a look that you would consider aesthetically. You wouldn't have to prune it back too far into old wood where it looks ugly, essentially. So you'd be looking at about $1,000 every couple of years to do the pruning that's required.
Thank you. And Mayor, I'm wondering if this was, if we upheld staff's decision on this tree tonight, is there still an opportunity for the homeowner, if they choose to actually come to ask council to reconsider?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Hidley, under this new tree protection bylaw, what is the process for council to consider and for applicants to appeal? Or can you just walk us through what that looks like? Is it a one and done and a 6-month waiting period before they can come back again?
No, it would really depend on the schedule. I'll just find the section here in the bylaw that walks through the reconsideration process. So section 13.2, it says, if the decision is made by the manager of park services with regards to the issuance or refusal of a tree permit, the owner has the right to have council reconsider the matter. If an owner would like council to reconsider a decision, the owner must deliver written notice of the request to the Director of Corporate Services within 14 days of receiving notice of decision. The owner shall be notified by the Director of Corporate Services of the date that council reconsider the decision, and council may confirm, overturn, or modify the decision of the manager of park services.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Appleton?
First of all, Your Worship, I might just make the motion to receive Mr. Hidley's report.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. I'm happy just to call the question on that up front, so we just have it done. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would make the motion that the reconsideration for removal of the Leyland Cypress 880 Transit Road be denied.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton.
I'll second that.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, you have the floor.
Thank you, Worship. And I appreciate the comments of the rest of council. I guess council has heard me speak to tree removals in the past and about precedents and about how things, what tone we set with these reconsiderations. I see here a tree that the Director of Park Services has clearly identified as being healthy in all respects, not being in conflict with any services or underground infrastructure that is being impacted by it, situated in such a place on the lot that it could reasonably be expected to not really cause although there is potentially an impact to an adjacent tree, it's not causing a waste or maintenance or yard maintenance of undue burden as has been presented in some other reconsideration requests. So I find it hard to approve reconsideration on this tree, which seems to have so minor an impact, or so, and again, it's not detailed by the landowner what for what purpose. I think it would be difficult for council to deny any other removal requests in the future. I think you would find that most other reconsiderations will be with trees that had significantly greater impacts, or for trees that were in not as healthy or in a declining condition. So I feel that I don't see any kind of clear justification for reconsidering the removal of what is identified clearly as a completely healthy tree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have got a couple of seconders, so I'll go to them and then go to Councillor Zelka. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't recall seeing it in the report. It would be helpful to know what the current percent tree coverage is of the property. So with that in mind, I went to the CRD maps website, and they have a map layer that shows percent tree coverage as of 2005. And it says for 880, its current coverage is in the 5 to 10%, approximately 25% range. But the property next door drops down to 10% and less as it moves away from that property. So that's another reason why I'll be supporting the denial, because I'd like to see that we maintain our tree canopy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion? Councillor Patterson, you had your hand up.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. And I appreciate Councillor Appleton's comments and the rationale for it. My concern on this, though, is staff have acknowledged that this does not make a good specimen tree. It will be ongoing problems for the homeowner, both in its rate of growth and the expense of keeping it up. So, I think it's very disappointing that we don't have anything here from the homeowner to give more rationale to this. But I also, I just get concerned if homeowners feel like it's a punishment to have a tree in the yard, because it becomes so problematic for them. Our trees should be valued and they should be appreciated. And I think that situations like this make other people more cautious about planting any trees, because they don't want to have to perhaps come before council in the future. And perhaps they should choose wisely, but we don't know. And with nothing from the homeowner, we don't know if this homeowner was the one that planted it, if they purchased the property with the specimen already on. But that is my concern. So although I'll support the retention of the tree, knowing that the homeowner can come back, I think that we need to also take into consideration the financial impacts of maintaining some of these problem trees. And, if a homeowner is facing, in essence, $500 a year to maintain a tree, it can cause hardship. So I think we also need to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Braithwaite.
I'm going to support the motion basically because I agree with everything that Councillor Appleton has said. We do have to show some protection of the trees in our neighborhood. But I also hear what Councillor Patterson is saying as well, and I'm going to support it because I know that the homeowner can come back and if there are extenuating circumstances, they can come back and explain it to us, and then we can make another decision. So, but I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Any other discussion on this? Councillor Green,
Mayor
you did.
Murdoch?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. I will also be supporting the motion, and in addition to the comments that my colleagues have already made, I just want to point out that we had a stark reminder of how valuable large trees like this are to our community during the heat dome episode, for shade and for carbon sinking and all kinds of other things. And I'm sorry, but we have trees on our property that we have to maintain every year. Yes, there is a cost involved, but we think that's an investment both in the environment and in the tree canopy in Oak Bay. So it is awkward that the owner is not present to speak to us directly, but as Councillor Braithwaite points out, there are options for him or her in the future. But I really put a lot of value in Mr. Hidley's opinions. After all, our staff are trained arborists. They know trees. And maintenance is important. The fact that tree hasn't been maintained since 2017 is a problem, given its rate of growth and so on. But I think the tree is too valuable, and I will vote to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I just want to make a comment on the record here about this. I think I'm supportive of the motion as it's put forward, but I do think this is the wrong tree. I think that we have to be mindful that we want people to plant trees, but we want the right trees that are not. I can see a future in this within a very short period of time, 5, 10, 20 years, that it's going to be unmanageable, and it's going to have to come down anyway, and cheaper and more effective to replace these with appropriate trees at a time when that makes sense and can have it done. That being said, with no owner here to speak to their plans and to make a case for what would be planted there, I have a very hard time supporting the application. I just do. So if the owner wishes to, I just need a quick motion to extend the meeting here. Moved to 10:30. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Not opposed? That was a procedural motion to jump in there. What's that?
One other thing.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to confirm that the request from the owner for an appeal of the decision included no reasons, and it was not. I noticed it was not attached to the staff report, but it provided no reasons. It just simply stated that it was requesting an appeal of the decision under Section 13 of the bylaw. Staff have reached out numerous times trying to reach the individual. The only contact information we had was a phone number, and we've called and left messages. So unfortunately, we haven't made contact to confirm that they have they've received the message that the meeting is tonight, unless Chris has had communications with them that I'm not aware of, and Mr. Hidley can fill in more on that. But I just wanted to point that out, and if council is not comfortable moving ahead without hearing from the owner, then a motion to refer it to a future meeting, and we would make other attempts to bring the individual into the meeting if council wishes.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I think given that the owner can reappeal through the bylaw process to council, I think is sufficient. Given the conversation that's happened here, they would have to make a case for it and to come out with some mitigating factors for it to be considered from the sounds of it. So I think that's reasonable on the face of it. If they've made the application, it's here. I think we have to move things forward, and we're always open to considering these things again if they need to. So sorry,
I will mention, Your Worship, that I did go by the residents today to see if they were home. They unfortunately were not.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate staff's effort on this one, but at the end of the day, we have an application in front of us to consider. So we actually have a motion on the floor to consider. So is there any other discussion on the motion as it stands? All right, then I am just going to move this forward. All those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. That carries. So thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Hidley, for your input on this one and your efforts to contact the homeowner and we'll see if it comes back again for ongoing consideration.
Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Just with relation to that, given what Ms. Williams has just said and Mr. Hyde-Lay had said, there was another component to this that that the decision resulting from council's reconsideration be communicated to the applicant in writing. Should we also conclude that motion just so that as it seems to be difficult to communicate with the landowner, we want to make sure that they hear council's decision. Can we also make the motion to communicate in writing?
Yes, Ms. Vrela, do we need to include that in the motion?
If the bylaw speaks to that direction, Your Worship, staff would attempt to hand notify with a letter at the residence.
So not required as part of the motion?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Worship.
Yeah, no, thank you. After 10 o'clock, my chairing skills start going out the window. So, just for the record, we should try and keep these on time. Item number 6. I understand, I got a message from staff. Councillor Green, you're needing to step off at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm having quite a bit of pain now, and I wanted to excuse myself from the meeting. I hope that won't cause a problem. I think you still have quorum.
We still have quorum, and we really appreciate, we know this is I won't go into reasons for the public, but do definitely appreciate you making the effort to be here tonight and participating in the council meeting. Take good care of yourself, and we'll see you next week.
And thank you to staff for accommodating my special needs tonight. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Item number 6.5, we have, again, Mr. Payne here for earthquake insurance deductible consideration. Welcome back, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. The district maintains property insurance for approximately $100 million in building and related property replacement. The insurance industry is currently experiencing significant rate growth. Insurers are grappling with rising costs and incurring the cost of natural disaster, which has been exacerbated by climate change. And the municipal industry, insurance industry in particular, is being consolidated, meaning that there's less room for competition. And what's resulted is significant growth in our premiums. The district utilizes a broker to negotiate the best rates in the industry, but despite our broker's best efforts, insurance premiums are expected to rise by 19% next year, which is approximately $33,000 if the same coverage is maintained. So the district reached out to a broker and asked for different options to present for council consideration. One of the alternatives that was presented was for the district to increase its earthquake deductible, from a minimum of $100,000 or 10% to $250,000 or 15%. So increasing our deductible, so staff have attempted to demonstrate the additional risk of increasing our earthquake deductible by quantifying the additional costs that would occur in the case of a total catastrophic loss of property. That's just one extreme scenario to try to demonstrate the additional risk that this would pose. There's obviously many scenarios in between nothing to a full catastrophic loss that could be considered. One thing to keep in mind is that some of our risk may be mitigated by the current provincial disaster financial assistance program, which covers up to 80% of uninsured losses. So if we increase our deductible, some of that deductible, in the case of a insured loss, would be covered by the current program if it remained in existence. So the program's not guaranteed 50, 100 years from now, but that's the current state of the program as we understand it. And in addition to that, council has signaled a desire to move towards sustainable infrastructure funding. This would reduce our premiums over time, as the district would not need to provide full coverage for the replacement costs of our buildings. So for instance, suppose that we've saved 50% of the cost of replacement of our buildings, we would only really need to insure at that point in time the additional 50% of the replacement cost of those buildings. So our premiums would be lower in the future if we did move to that sustainable infrastructure funding. So it's just an opportunity to bring forward. Typically, insurance renewals is not something that's brought before council for consideration, but The reason that it's before you today is simply because it is a risk question, which lends itself to a governance decision. Whatever decision is made today, staff will execute our property insurance renewal shortly after tonight's meeting. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. As mostly lay people around this table looking at insurance options here, just to work clear, in your analysis of this, your recommendation is to move to the 15%. I recognize it's our decision, but in your evaluation of the options here, you feel that's the best of the available options to us at this time?
Yes, Your Worship. Of course, there's many factors. It goes without saying, many factors that we just can't predict in terms of determining what is the best decision from a risk to cost perspective. But we do believe, from the information we have available, that it is the best option, simply because much of our uninsured losses are mitigated by the provincial financial disaster relief program as it stands right now. I will say that insurance companies, they want to profit over the long term. So if they offer you an increased deductible, that's because they expect to, for a lower cost annually, that's because they expect that they expect to profit from that arrangement over the long term. So without other mitigating factors, long term, reducing our deductible or increasing our deductible here would probably cost the district more. However, with the extra mitigated factors, we expect that from a cost benefit perspective, it's the best decision.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much, staff, for this excellent report. I do note that there's a federal program called the Federal Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement, similar name to the provincial program, and that federal program backstops the provincial program, which reduces our risk even further. I absolutely concur with our Director of Financial Services on this, and do note that many homeowners are effectively doing this themselves. So I think this is a very prudent thing to do. And the only question I might ask, I'm not sure the Director of Financial Services can answer it, but there is a new program or a new framework that was announced at the provincial level called the Sendai Framework, where they brought it in. It has to do with in the area of disaster financial assistance or disaster, I don't know if it's assistance or whatever it is, but there might potentially be monies there. Is it possible that through you, Chair, I could ask whether Director of Financial Services knows much about the Sendai Framework aspects of this?
Mr. Payne, do you have an answer for that?
Your Worship, no, I'm not explicitly familiar with that program at this time. Apologies for that.
No, thank you.
Thank you. It may be premature, but I understand that it may help with these sorts of things into the future. Thank you very much. I'll be supporting the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Payne, for bringing this forward. I think we all realize the impact on the increased natural disasters that are occurring because of climate change and just many events throughout, that insurance premiums are rising substantially in all sectors. What I am wondering is, and I know that Oak Bay is, of course, in a more seismically active area. Do we have a feel for what other municipalities are doing with their insurance deductibles? Because it's really impacting the industry in general. So do we have any feel for how others are being impacted and what moves that they are taking?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. To answer the question, yeah, there is a mixed, there's been a mixed approach to it, I would say. There certainly have been some municipalities doing what's being proposed today, because essentially it's, for lack of a better term, offloading some of the risk onto the province. And so folks around the province do recognize that the provincial program changes the risk relationship. And so certainly there have been municipalities in BC that are choosing to increase their earthquake deductible. And certainly their local conditions play into that decision quite a bit. So we wouldn't be unique if council supported the staff recommendation today. And there's certainly some municipalities that take a more conservative approach with a lower deductible.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that information, Mr. Payne. I'm trying to understand also from this, the Disaster Financial Assistance Program, as Mr. Payne has reviewed in his report. The financial assistance would be what I'm trying to understand, it would be to replace the value of the building at the time the disaster occurs, as opposed to funding replacement of the structure. I take into consideration that Oak Bay's buildings are really at a very advanced age and not necessarily in the best repair. So what I'm trying to understand is what value would insurance provide versus what value would the disaster financial assistance provide?
Mr. Payne, do you want to provide as good an overview as you can?
Yes, Your Worship, and it's an excellent point because to my knowledge, disaster financial assistance, they would provide recovery costs for uninsured losses. So in this case, in the district's case, we have insurance for complete replacement of our facilities. So notwithstanding the fact that many of our facilities are amortized or beyond or approaching their useful life, and therefore their market value is less than their replacement cost, our insurance would see it that we are provided with complete replacement costs less the deductible. And then the deductible would be covered 80% by provincial financial assistance. So that's how the two, let's call them insurance programs, would intermingle.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. No, that's all the questions. I generally support staff's recommendation on this.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton?
I'm prepared to make the motion to authorize staff to increase the district's earthquake deductible to $250,000 or 15%.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on that?
If I might, Your Worship, I just wanted to
Go
make
ahead.
the point that I think it's important, and the report and the rationale is great as always. I did want to make the point that I appreciate staff's pointing out that the expense of insurance increasing so rapidly is really closely tied to the impacts of climate change. So irrespective of whether people feel like they're encountering climate change impacts in our specific community, it actually doesn't matter because the insurers that we all rely on to provide that coverage need to anticipate the impacts of natural disasters in other jurisdictions. And as staff have noted, the availability of different insurers is decreasing and the market for that service is decreasing because it's such a difficult thing to predict. So I do appreciate the specific mention of climate change impacts, because if people feel that they're not encountering climate change impacts, this is a direct impact to their property tax bills brought about by increasing insurance rates, which are themselves caused by climate change. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I don't see any other hands up on this motion, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I just need a motion to receive as well, the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on the receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thanks. Item number 6.6, engineering services. With council's indulgence, I might move this one to the end of the agenda so we have a couple of land use things I'd like to get through to make sure that we're absolutely through it. This is the only one that isn't time sensitive. It doesn't have people sort of attending on wait, so if that's with council's agreement. So we'll move 6.6 to the end of the agenda. So that moves us on to item number 7.1. which is the development DVP for 875 Link Leads. And I believe we have, is it Mr. Weber that's presenting this tonight?
Your worship, that will be Ms. McDougall.
Okay, sorry. Welcome, Ms. McDougall.
Hello. Thank you, your worship. Are you able to hear me?
We are. Thank you for asking.
Okay, perfect. So before you for review is development variance permit application number 00114, which is to facilitate renovations to a single family home located at 875 Linkley's Avenue. The requested variances are with regards to sections of the zoning bylaw, specifically to reduce the front lot line setback from 7.62 meters to 4.9 meters, and to increase the allowable front yard paved surface area from 25% to 35% coverage. The requested variances would facilitate proposed renovations to the existing single-family home, including the construction of a new covered porch and a reconfigured walkway, which are part of interior and exterior improvements designed with the purpose of modernizing the appearance and function of the home. The subject property is designated in the official community plan as established neighborhoods and is zoned RS5, one family residential use. These designations support single-family residential uses, and the proposed development variance aligns with the intended use of the property. The applicant is proposing to construct a covered porch attached to the front of the house, which will include a high vaulted framing under the roof of the porch, and changes to the existing entryway, stairs, and paved walkway. The proposed exterior renovations will modernize the appearance of the 1946 home while preserving most of the existing structure. The openness of the covered porch helps soften the building massing, providing a positive addition to the streetscape. The changes generally maintain the character of development and will contribute to the social fabric of the neighborhood. The applicant has also requested a variance to increase the allowable front yard paved surface area from 25 to 30% for a reconfigured paved pathway. So the existing paved surface area in the front yard is currently 41.7 square meters, or 35.9% coverage of the total front yard, and is therefore non-conforming to the zoning bylaw. The total allowable paved surface area for the front yard is 25%, or what would be 29 square meters based on the current front yard total area. So the proposed redevelopment of the front yard will reduce the total paved surface area to 34.9 square meters. And so a 30% paved coverage would permit that additional 5.9 square meters of paved surface area than what is currently allowed. In addition to the redesigned pathway, the applicants are also proposing to remove a strip of paved surface from the existing driveway, replacing it with a new grass strip, and this helps reduce that total amount of paved surface area in the front yard further. A tree management plan has been provided with the application and has been reviewed. So there's currently only one tree planted on the subject property, which is protected by law. And the construction of the porch is unlikely to impact the root zone of this tree. However, the new roof of the porch and the reconstructed sidewalk will impact the tree to some degree. And as such, it is recommended that the tree be removed. Now, if removed, the owners will be required to replace the tree at a ratio of 2:1 as per our bylaw. So overall, the proposed porch and additional renovations will modernize the facade of the existing building, and staff consider the requested variance to be supportable and are now seeking council direction with regards to public notification for DVP 00114. Should council move forward with authorizing the development variance permit, notification to adjacent property owners would be undertaken in accordance with the Oak Bay Land Use Procedures bylaw. The application would then return to council at a subsequent meeting following notification for council or for consideration of council for approval. The applicant has also conducted some neighborhood consultation with the adjacent property owners and provided staff with 6 letters in support of their application. The applicant, I believe, is also in attendance this meeting, and is available if council has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDougall. Are there questions by council to staff or to the applicant? I'm getting head shakes around the table in here. That's fairly clear. So if no questions, then we'll go to a motion. We can have, go ahead, Councillor Zelka, you had a question?
Yeah, I apologize. A question through you. I guess I'll start with staff. For the new porch that we're going to be putting in, I wasn't quite clear. Is there going to be a living space below the porch to extend the living area of the basement?
Thank you, Councillor
Zelka. I believe
Zelka.
that's allowed, but I just wanted to at least ask.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Probably Ms. McDougall knows the answer to that question.
Absolutely, yep, I can speak to that. So no, there will not be a living space under the porch. There will be some storage there that'll probably be used for the what has been indicated to be used for the children's play equipment.
All right, thank you. Secondary question is, I'm sad to see the tree go. A two for one replacement is reasonable. Just want to confirm the 2 new trees would be placed on the same property. Is that correct?
Ms. McDougall?
Yes, that is correct.
So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The 2 new trees are on that property. Okay.
The applicant has indicated that they are more than willing to replant trees on the property. Yes,
Right,
that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just to follow up on Councillor Zelka's comment about the trees, I noticed that the requirement for the tree canopy is 35%, the existing is 14%, and what is being proposed, even when 2 new trees, takes it down to 8%. Is that accurate?
Ms. McDougall, can you speak to the tree canopy cover expectations on this property?
Excuse me here, just a moment while I'm pulling up the numbers here. So yes, we have the canopy cover required is 35% as per our Oak Bay strategies. What is existing is with the current tree, and then what is proposed is basically dependent upon what will be planted with the applicant's new trees. And we have been told by our arborist that 1 small tree and 1 large tree is what will need to be provided to meet the canopy target for the property. And at this point, we only have the plans as shown, and so hopefully with the additional 2 trees, we should be able to meet that required 35% target.
Maybe perhaps if this moves forward, we can get clarification on that when it comes back to council in terms of what the exact planting plan is to achieve that goal. I noticed there's just the 1 tree on the property right now. Ms. Varela, you...
Thank you, Your Worship. So we would bring the issue of the tree back. As the staff report reads, there's currently only 1 tree on the property. So there is the 2-to-1 ratio as per the tree protection bylaw. Certainly we can have the arborist in attendance to speak to that at the time. Again, the matter at hand tonight is about, does the project have enough merit to go forward with notification? So thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Ms. Rilla. It's helpful to have these questions now so we can have those answers ready when it comes back. So it sounds like we're not probably getting to 35%. We're getting a 2-to-1 replacement, which raises it from a very low percentage to a moderate percentage. But that clarification would be helpful, I think, when it comes back. Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
No, with that clarification, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this? I'm not seeing any, so we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. I am going to ask the indulgence of council just to extend us by another, whatever council sees fit as appropriate, and we'll have unanimous support. It's getting late. We have a few things we should get through, so maybe another 20 minutes to 11 o'clock. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on that? Councillor Zelka, you have your hand up.
No, I tried to text you to say that I can't go past. I'm exhausted. I'm getting very tired. If I had left the meeting before 10:30, you would still have quorum, I believe, in which case you could extend the meeting. That would be my recommendation, but I don't want to be part of that vote because I don't want to ruin the plans of what you may have in mind.
There's no plans in mind. We're just trying to get to as much of the business as we can. I'd like to just get to the land use one so that the owners can move forward if possible, if that's the will of council. But you can leave then, council.
My will is not allowing me, unfortunately, to go past 10:30 with 2 minutes left. Shall I leave the meeting, leaving you with quorum, or do you want to do something else?
Well, you're in the meeting now. You can vote to extend the meeting and then leave it because you have to leave. That's totally in accordance with procedure.
I'll gladly vote to extend, and then I will leave the meeting. Thank you.
The motion was to extend to 11. Is that correct, Councillors? Braithwaite. Oh, see, this is not good. Any other discussion on that then? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Zelk. I certainly appreciate you can only stick around as long as you can. So we have up next, not to rush through things, we just have the animal control bylaw for adoption. This has gone through 3 readings and discussion in the past. I don't think we need an introduction on it unless there's a desire from council to be reintroduced to the bylaw.
I'll move that the animal control bylaw number 4013 1999 amendment bylaw number 4797 2021 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just indicating they'll be voting against the motion, as I have for the several readings leading up to this.
Yes.
That I believe that the content of it is an overreach and is an undue limitation on property owners in Oak Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. These are hard when you approve of large portions of it, but don't approve of a single portion. But you've made your case very clearly and appreciate that, and also for explaining why the vote in the negative. I think I'm just going to call the question on this. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Appleton registered as opposed. That carries. And then we move on to item number 7.3, the ticket information utilization bylaw. This is attached to that same
I'll
piece.
move that the ticket information utilization bylaw number 3952 1997 amendment bylaw number 4798 2021 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this item? Same reason. So Councillor Appleton, thank you for expressing why. All those, listing any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Appleton opposed. Thank you very much for that. We're moving on to item number 8.1, and I'm going to have Mr. Weber introduce 3170 Beach Drive. Welcome, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. If you recall, this application initially went to Council for review on July 6th. So because it's a development variance permit, it's now returning after the public notification. So I'll just provide a bit of a brief summary of my initial overview, just to kind of refresh your memory a bit. The District Oak Bay is in receipt of an upland siting and design application and development variance permit application to renovate an existing single-family home located at 3170 Beach Drive. The proposal involves constructing 3 separate additions to the existing residence, as well as constructing a new pool house and in-ground pool in the rear yard of the subject property. A total of 4 variances to the zoning bylaw are requested as part of the proposed renovations, including a relaxation to the required minimum interior side lot line setback for the construction of a storage room addition, as well as an addition to the existing garage on the north side of the residence, and a relaxation to the maximum required building height, the maximum required occupiable height, and the maximum required roof height for the construction of an addition on the south side of the residence, which provides more interior living space. The application was reviewed at the July Advisory Design Panel meeting, and the panel recommended that the upland siting design application be recommended to Council for approval as presented, and that the development variance permit application be recommended to Council for approval with the exception of the north interior side lot line setback variances. Staff determined that overall the proposed application to the single family home on the subject property will complement the design of the existing 1922 home, and that the building and site design generally conform with the Uplands housing policies within the official community plan, as well as the Uplands design guidelines. Staff further determined that the impact of the proposal on adjacent properties and the street is minimized by the retention of mature trees and shrubs throughout the site, providing screening and mitigating privacy issues. Therefore, staff considered the proposed development to be supportable. As I mentioned, the application was initially presented to Council at the July 6th Council meeting, and on September 29th, public notification of the variance request was mailed to all properties within 50 meters of the subject property, and as per the land use procedures bylaw. And one piece of public feedback has been received from an owner of a property, no public feedback actually has been received in response to this application. And staff are requesting that council direction on this application. And the builder and applicant Cindy Scott and potentially the designer Jeff Costin are in attendance tonight to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Over to council. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant at this time? I'm not seeing any, so we have a motion and speak to the motion.
I will move the recommendation that the report be received and that the Upland Siting and Design ADP 00137 and Development Variance Permit Application DVP 00111 to undertake renovation and vary the minimum required interior side yard setback, maximum required building height, maximum required occupiable height, and maximum required roof height regulations for the construction of additions to the residence at 3170 Beach Drive be approved.
Thank you. It gets harder and harder to read these things late at night. Any other discussion on that? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, as I've stated previously, that I'm not in favor of the removal of the significant size tree in order for the construction of the pool in this particular case. So I'm not in favor of the motion as it stands.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any, so we have a motion on the floor to approve. I will call the question. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Public input.
Yes, Your Worship.
I'm out of habit. See, this is what happens.
You're on a roll. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there any additional public input on this item on 3170 Beach Drive? Anybody who wishes to speak to the variances under consideration at this time, it is appropriate to do so. You can hit *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone, or you can use the Zoom app to hit the reactions button and then signal that you wish to raise your hand. And I apologize, that's just me being out of habit on these things, and maybe a bit of the late hour as well. Always good to come up with a good excuse before the things. Anybody wish to speak to this item on the agenda? 3170 Beach Drive. Not seeing any hands raised or any indications. I'm ready to come back to this table and to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Appleton registered as opposed. That carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. We're moving on to item under number 8.2, which is you again, without the siting and design, but a variance request at 1742 Elgin Road. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As with the last application, this one is also returning to council after public notification. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a development variance permit application to allow for the construction of an addition to the existing single-family home located at 1742 Elgin Road. The proposal would permit the construction of a single-story addition to the east side of the existing single-family dwelling on the subject property, which is proposed to be built to match the finish and architectural style of the existing 1951 residence. The siting of the proposed addition would require a variance of two regulations within the zoning bylaw, a relaxation of the minimum required interior side lot line setback, and a relaxation of the minimum required total lot line setback. Staff reviewed the proposal and determined that it generally meets the policy direction within the official committee plan by allowing for the adaptive reuse of existing housing stock, and that the location of the subject property on a street corner combined with the siting of the proposed addition towards the center of the lot and existing vegetative screening will minimize the impact of the addition to neighboring properties. Therefore, staff consider the proposed development be supportable. The application was initially presented to council at the July 6th council meeting, and on September 29th, public notification of the variance request was mailed to all properties within 50 meters of the subject property as per the land use procedures bylaw. And one piece of public feedback was received in response from a property owner located within the 50-meter notification buffer from the subject property. And that piece of feedback was in support of the application and recommended that the variance request be approved by council. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and the builder and applicant, James Keith, is in attendance tonight to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to make the call before we go to council. If there's anybody who wishes to speak to this application, please hit *9 at this time if you're on the phone to indicate your intention to speak. And if you're within the Zoom app, you may raise your hand through the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen and hit raise hand to indicate your desire to speak and address council. So as the public is moving to do that, if there's anybody who wishes to speak to it, I'll come back to this table in case there's any questions of the council to the applicant or to staff. I don't see any questions, so I'll go back to the public and see if there's anybody who's raised their hand. I don't see anybody on my screen, but I'm not always able to see everything. Is there anybody who's indicated on staff screen? Nope.
So I'll move receipt.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed?
And I'll move that development variance permit application DVP 00112 to vary the minimum exterior side lot line setback and the minimum total side lot line setback regulations to allow the construction of an addition to the residence of 1742 Elgin Road be approved.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? And my thanks to the last two applicants who sat through a long meeting to get two approvals. But it's the way the system works, so we'll just go with it and try and be as efficient as possible as we can on these things. On my notes here, I just want to see, we have one other item, which is 6.6. I think it'd probably be appropriate to refer this to a future meeting, as there's no particular time sensitivity to it. And I think it's one of these ones that I think would benefit from the entirety of council being here. Just for my clarification, though, I know Mr. Rennick has patiently waited to address council on this. Is there anything of a time-sensitive nature that I'm not aware of on the widening or the permanence options for the wider sidewalks?
Thank you, Your Worship. There is the only matter that would be considered time sensitive is that the temporary sidewalk on Crescent Road that council directed in, I believe it was March, it will expire on December 31st. I'm sorry, it's scheduled to be removed by December 31st unless we receive additional direction or alternative direction. So that's somewhat time sensitive, but you do have another 2.5 months.
Okay, that's sufficient, I think. So the appropriate motion would be, if council's willing, and I think it's appropriate, to refer this. Is that the right terminology here, to refer it to a future council meeting? That way we don't have to name a specific date. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. The appropriate wording for the motion is to defer it.
Defer it, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So I'll move to defer item 6.6 to a future council meeting.
Second.
Any discussion on the deferral? Councillor Appleton, you look like you want to speak.
Thank you, Worship. I will still support deferral, but right, and because I would actually like to debate this tonight, but I do realize the late hour, and I do actually think at this point we're a little low on council members, and I would appreciate an opportunity to have a debate with the fulsome council. So, although. This was the one item that I was definitely interested in talking about tonight, but it'll just have to wait. Thank you.
We'll leave it there. Well, see, we have a little hook to bring you back, Councillor Appleton. So the motion is to refer it. Is it moved and seconded, I heard? Yes. Any other discussion on it? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Look forward to this conversation when it comes back. And then we have a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed, not opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who's watched through this evening, and staff who have, I'm sure, very stiff legs at this point. I'm sure we all do. Thank you for that, and for councillors calling in remotely. We will see you all next week.
Recording stopped.